Hey, what's happening, everybody? It's Blair Johnson with the Badass Records podcast, reminding you that new episodes drop Thursdays. You can keep tabs on Twitter, Instagram, where you stream your audio, YouTube, etc. If you feel like supporting the show, make sure you check out the merch store at badassrecordspodcast.com. And if you want to hit me up about being on an episode with me in person here in Kansas City, or if you want me to travel to you, we can probably make that happen too. It's badassrecordspodcast@gmail.com. Appreciate you stopping by. Hope you enjoy the show. Thank you so much for coming over and agreeing to do this with me. I appreciate it. This would be, if all goes well, episode 110 of Badass Records Podcast, hanging with Mark Manning of Wednesday MidDay Medley on KKFI 90.1 FM. And this has been, you're like rolling up on a quarter century. Is that right?
We're getting ready to finish our 20th year.
20th. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been at the station for almost a quarter century.
Okay. That's what it was.
I worked in another radio show prior to this one.
Okay. Is that 10th Voice?
Right.
What was the skinny with that one?
That is a show that has been on KKFI since almost the very beginning of KKFI.
And it's still
okay.
On.
It's one of the public affairs shows that we offer. It's LGBTQIA public affairs show.
Okay.
And it's based on the idea that Kinsey sexual studies that were done had a theory that 10% of the population was gay.
Okay.
And so the 10th voice, one out of every 10 people.
Got it.
If you're in a group of about 30 people, you could probably guess that there might be 2 or 3 that happen to be LGBTQIA.
Sure.
According to this theory.
Yeah.
It worked in my grandmother had 27 grandchildren and 2.5 were gay.
2.5?
But it worked in that a small town in Nebraska. But yeah, in that show, there's like a responsibility with a show like that that's been on before you and will go on after you. And there aren't a lot of public affairs shows on TV or radio anywhere else for LGBTQIA.
Right.
And it's been on since 1989.
Wow.
And they actually had a show. There was a march on Washington in 1987, and people came back from that with a whole newfound energy, and a lot of gay organizations were created that had never been there before, and they wanted to do a radio show, and they created a whole pilot and brought it to KKFI, and it sat on a shelf for a year, and somebody couldn't come in to do their show on a Sunday night, and so the manager was like, "Put that show on there," and then called them up and said, "You got a show, come on next week, you got to do it." You know what I mean? That's how it got on the air.
Okay.
Literally. Originally.
I want to come back to it, but a minute ago you mentioned the founding of KK. What's the story there?
There was a group of people that were taking a communiversity class.
Okay.
In like 1976, 77, that kind of period of time.
Okay.
And they were studying a book called Sex and Broadcasting.
Oh, really?
And that was sort of the name of the book. They gave it a fancy title, but it was sort of like why we need community radio.
Okay.
Why community radio is important. And it was people that were in a way kind of predicting the future of where we are now. Because right now, if you look at the media landscape, a lot of radio is owned by the same companies. People buy up multiple radio stations and multiple television stations.
And newspapers
outlets. And all of that. And how many of those TV or radio stations are from here that are dedicated to investing in Kansas City and telling the story of Kansas City? Like, what's happening in the neighborhood? What's happening on the ground? And so these like very kind of liberal-minded hippie type folk, they kept this dream alive, and it took them about 16 years to raise the money to buy a license and to buy a tower. They actually bought their own tower. We have 100,000 watt signal that is broadcast, KKFI out to the whole. We can go for 40 miles around this tower.
Okay.
On a good day, you can pick up KKFI in Topeka.
I was just going to ask, can you catch it in Lawrence?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And a lot of it depends on, how the transmitter is working that day. But in the very early days of KKFI, they would go down into Tom Crane, one of the early founders of KKFI, down his basement, and people would record their shows on reel-to-reel, splice them together with a razor blade and tape, take the reel-to-reel out to the tower. It's like Blue Parkway, Kansas. It's like this unincorporated part of Kansas City, kind of like, and put it on in the trailer.
That's some dedication.
That's how they did it in
Wow.
in the beginning, and then they finally were able to get the signal transmitted to the tower and work out all of that technological stuff, and make it happen. But it's really a miracle in broadcasting.
So a tower is a thing that requires like TLC and maintenance, right? It can't just boom and then it works until the end of time.
Exactly. No,
So
it takes.
Has it required upgrades? Have there been special dedicated project?
Yeah, it has to first of all be lit. You have to have the tower. There has to be lights on this tower. And when the lights go out, you have to call the FAA. You have to call people that are flying to make sure they know that there's a tower there that isn't being lit for whatever the reason, electrical outage or whatever. There's a lot of maintenance that go into that. Yeah, it has to, every once in a while, I think they have to paint it. Huh. And then there's a transmitter that's a really expensive piece. And transmitters have a tube in them. And we currently are replacing our transmitter tube with a transmitter tube that we just got ordered in. So we're using our backup for like the last 6 weeks while we're waiting for the new tube to come in. But we've had situations where we had to raise over $100,000 to buy a new transmitter. These things are really expensive.
Yeah.
But 100,000 watts, you can, 24/7. And we bounce our signal from our location to that tower, and then it's broadcast all over the region. And we have a pretty good signal.
Yeah.
And we're one of the few community radio stations in the country that have 100,000 watts.
Huh. How much do you think most community stations have?
It ranges from 25 to 40 to here.
Okay.
There are low watt stations operating throughout the communities also. That a kind of a new trend is that where you can do low watt stations for small niche audiences, or maybe there's like a jazz audience or whatever. And we have this responsibility at KKFI to serve voices that are underserved. That's sort
really
of
cool.
That's part of the community radio mission in so many ways. So that's why we have public affairs shows for LGBTQIA. We have a Native Affairs public affairs show. We have a labor union public affairs show. We have an environmental show.
Now, KKFI is or is not the Bridge?
Right. They're different. The Bridge is a public radio station.
Okay.
Public and community radio stations both operate on a non-commercial license with the FCC. And non-commercial licenses actually have more rules that are applied to them because they're non-profit and they don't pay taxes to the government. But in doing that, we are not able to sell things. We don't sell stuff. And we can't even sound like we sell stuff. So if someone comes on the radio and is like, you got to go buy this, it's the best thing you ever tried in your life, which is the language we hear in commercial.
Right.
And people are almost brainwashed to think that's natural, but that's not. That's someone trying to sell you something. If we use that language on KKFI, we would be in violation of our license.
Wow.
We're in the business of educating people, giving people information. We can still tell the same story.
Sure.
We can still tell the who, what, where, when, how, and whatever. And where can people go to find out more about your recording? Or where are places that it's available for folk to learn about more of this? You can still handle the same groundwork, just with different language and with a way of approaching it and the point of view of We're not trying to sell you breast enhancement or skincare products or diet pills or whatever it is that the commercial radio sells nowadays.
Yeah.
We're not about that. We have underwriting where it's like support for this program is brought to you by the Missouri Repertory Theater presenting Nina Simone's blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
You know? But The Bridge is a nonprofit public radio station that was originally out of Warrensburg and still is.
Oh, okay.
And then KCPT, Kansas City Public Television, bought The Bridge.
Oh.
And brought it into their fold.
I see.
Because they wanted to be able to have a TV radio combination. And that's kind of a trend in a lot of public broadcasting. KDHX in St. Louis is a public television, public radio combination also.
Okay.
And there's other elements like that too. And that it's an advantage to The Bridge because they have the staff and the marketing department of KCPT now to help market their radio station.
Yeah. Okay.
And they have television facilities to help, live at the Bridge. There's different bands that come through that John Hart will interview. They might have a show that night and they come into the Bridge like in the daytime and do a few songs and a little bit of an interview, and the Bridge videotapes that and that goes to their YouTube content.
But KKFI doesn't have a nickname like that.
We're community radio.
Community radio.
Yeah. Okay. We've had different nicknames, but the Bridge is sort of like you can go to other cities and find a bridge.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
There's other places that use that term, the bridge. Some people use the term like the current. Some people call it the river. There's all these different for what is essentially a AAA format.
Okay.
And we're different at KKFI than that. We have 85 locally produced radio shows.
Wow.
That are produced and created by over 150 volunteer programmers. And you'll hear 2,000 different songs in a week at KKFI.
Wow.
And none of it came from a program director or from a computerized system that plays all those songs, and the DJs are really just introducing them in between. These are all created by the host and producer of that show, who's like, I want to play this song this week. You know what I mean? So the variety is like incredible.
Yeah. Cheeto Flow, Ian Hollowell. Just
started on KKFI.
Yes.
One of our brand new, we just brought in a team. We just brought in about 24 new programmers.
Really?
I'm a volunteer at KKFI, and I got involved in being on the programming committee.
Okay.
We have committees. KKFI is like a little democracy.
Okay.
There's a board of directors. There's an active member system that you can become a part of by volunteering a little bit extra.
Okay.
If you volunteer more than just not only doing your show, but only to help build the station. It's like a community grocery where if you help stock the shelves, you can get a discount on the groceries.
Sure.
So there's 4 staff members that are paid. For example, KCUR, they have 75 paid staff members.
Okay.
One of their radio shows, like Steve Kresge,
Okay.
There's probably about 10 to 12 people that make sure that the show happens.
Okay.
There's a producer, there's an engineer, there's associate producers, there's researchers, writers, all kinds of people are involved. Wow. Steve's like reading a script that people have written for him. And he's involved in that too. But so all of those 12 people at KKFI, one person does all of that, generally speaking. We do have public affairs shows that are teams of people. Like the Heartland Labor Forum has about 12 people on their team, but they rotate every week. So it's not them every week. So we have in our system of governance, we have standing committees that are membership committee, grievance committee, governance committee, finance committee, and then programming committee.
Okay.
And I don't know if you ever heard the expression, for God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee to save it.
No, that's great.
It's good to have a sense of humor about these things, but a committee decides things at KKFA.
Okay.
Through a democratic process of voting, and the vote that gets, the idea that gets the most votes gets passed out of the committee, and then it goes before the board of directors, and then that body of government, which is elected by the active members, then they approve that or not. And then it has to happen. Somebody has to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's you can get things done if you want to. It just takes a little bit longer because you have to go through this process. But as you go through the process, you can get more people to buy into it and delegate parts of the whole project out to more than just one or two people to do it. Otherwise, you're going to go crazy and you're going to want to kill yourself. But about 5 years ago, KKFI had a big strategy session, and they were looking towards the future. And they're like, what do we need for our organization as we go into the future? And one of them is we need younger programmers. And also, we need more women. And also, we need more people of diversity. We have a really diverse group, but we need more.
Sure.
So we and the programming committee just recently brought in 24 new programmers. And it took us 18 months to do this. And we had to start by looking at our schedule and finding a way of creating room for 15 new shows. So we changed our schedule. And we tried to do no harm. So like we just moved things like an hour later, an hour earlier.
Sure.
There were several shows that were 3-hour shows that had become 3-hour shows. Historically, there was a time when KKFI had a bad manager and a lot of people were thrown off the airwaves and left in protest, and so shows were made longer because there were fewer people to do them. So we decided to take 3-hour shows and make them 2 hours, and that gave us room to add 15 new shows. And then we put out a call to the community through our own airwaves, because radio stations can use their own airwaves to communicate. Do you want to be a programmer at KKFI? And we also put it through social media.
Yeah.
And we had about 75 people respond to that. And then we responded back to all 75 of those people saying, thank you.
Did folks think that 75 was a good number?
Nobody really, we hadn't really done this before.
Okay.
We hadn't really done something like this before. We'd changed our schedule before, but we'd never decided, let's add 15 new shows to our schedule and find new people to do it, you know? And so we were kind of like figuring this out as we were going along.
Sure.
But in order to be involved in KKFI, it starts by filling out a volunteer application. Mm-hmm. And then if you want to do a show at KKFI, there's a show application that anybody can go to our website and fill out. And then that goes to the programming committee. So we were just drawing attention to that and trying to bring about this energy. And from that 75, about 35 people put in volunteer applications. And then about 27 or somewhere between 27 and 30 started the training process at KKFI. Oh. And it takes a couple months,
I bet,
to go through the training process because there's a whole checklist of things you need to learn how to do. And then there's a written test of about 70 questions that you have to pass. And so anyway, we got people through this process, and we put I think in the end it was around 23, 24 new programmers on the airwaves.
For a total of how many?
From out of the 75.
No, but I mean, so how many total are there?
So there's about 150.
Okay, and if you're a programmer, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a show, does it? Or
it means you have a show.
Okay.
If you're
150?
That's the terminology that we use, programmer. We're working on maybe changing what we call things because the word programmer is confusing to people. But there are some programmers that run the board.
Yeah.
And then there are other people that work on shows that just host and produce the show. For example, we just put out one of our new shows that we put on the air is called the People Power Hour. Okay. And it's put on by Casey Tenants, who are an organization here in town that are working on renters' rights. And they formed several 501c3 and a 501c4. And they're working with city governments and landlords. And they're basically using collective bargaining. 49% of the Kansas City population are renters. And a lot of times they don't have any rights or, are at the mercy of sometimes bad landlords. Sure. And so they're using the same collective bargaining techniques that unions use as renters and organizing together to try to affect positive change. Okay. And make sure people aren't living in a horrible situation. Sure. and actually have created a Bill of Rights. And so they have a radio show now on KKFI.
Cool.
And they have a guy that is the engineer of the show, and then they have 4 people that host the show.
Okay.
And I helped mentor that show for about 4 or 5 months. And just me being with them, it was just me being in the studio, making sure that they were using the microphones correctly, and if there was a problem, I could be there to help them. And you have to have a certified programmer sign off on the log. There's a log that we have that a certified programmer has to be manning the station at all points and times. And if the FCC came in to inspect us, we would show them this log, and it would show that these people were responsible for our station during these. It's like the license to drive the car.
Sure.
And so until Ron, their engineer, got certified, I just came in and signed off on this stuff. But while being there, I learned so much about it, all of it. But some of those folks on that team are hosts and producers and create content and organize getting guests that come in and interview them. And some of them, and like Ron, for example, kind of engineers and runs the show from a technical point of view.
So all 150 programmers, not everybody it runs the board.
Not everybody, a good majority of them do.
Okay, so if you don't, does that mean you're producing it elsewhere and
if you
sending
don't,
it?
You're at the mercy of having someone engineer for you. You know what I mean? If you can engineer your own show, then you don't have to have, like on the Wednesday MidDay Medley show, I like a lot of people that do music shows at KKFI. I run the board, and I also host the show, and also produce the show, and research and set up guests. And there's a lot that goes. It's crazy, really. And then through social media, promoting the show can take as much time also
as you want to give it, right?
Right, as you want to give it.
You're allowed to,
right,
carve out of your week.
Exactly. And social media also, like when the world started using Facebook outside of like the like universities and stuff, but it used to be just schools, that Facebook was for students, and all of a sudden it became something more for all of us. And it was somewhere around 2009, I remember that being the time period. The music community of Kansas City adopted Facebook like an inter-office memo system that we'd never had before. And never before had there been a system where I know people say, well, what about MySpace? But MySpace didn't have the event situation like Facebook does. But venues, artists, radio people, promoter, everybody could communicate with everybody all together.
Yeah.
We could all become friends and create events and invite people to them. And you could look at a calendar and know what was happening all the time. And it was a really great way for like community radio shows like what I do to immediately connect to our audiences. And every week when you promote a show, you can tag all the bands you're going to be playing on the show, and then they will promote it through their places.
Yeah.
And they want to know they're being played also. So it's a really good way to connect with people. And
so when you say engineer a show, what exactly does that mean?
That was running the board.
Okay.
Basically pushing all the buttons to make it all happen.
And then producing a show is...
And producing the show is creating the content.
Okay.
Like tomorrow on the show, I have 4 guests that are coming on, and
you're 2 hours as well.
Right.
4 guests can make it feel a little crammed, I would think.
It's just segments. Like
right.
You've after a while, you figure out how to divide up the show to make it work best.
Sure.
And so it's a music show, so I try to make music be the biggest part of the show. But it also, I didn't start out doing this show I do now when I first started. It evolved, and the music community in Kansas City kind of taught me how to do the show indirectly. Because I first was like,
I think.
Because I was asked to do the show by our program director. At the time we had a program director, John Jessup, a really great guy. And at the time, in the past, they had been paying one person to do Monday through Friday on the morning buzz slot, and Monday through Friday on the midday medley slot. And they broke all that up and created 10 shows and invited other programmers to take over those shows. And so I transitioned from the 10th Voice into the Wednesday music show. And it was a whole different world than the 10th Voice, because I felt like there was a bigger audience out there for the show. And then I was like, well, I could just play all my favorite music I don't get to hear. And I really love the idea of the midday medley slot was mix it all up, play all the genres together, mix it up. And I got to be friends with Marion from Records with Merit because she was working in a different place at the time. And I always wanted someone from a record store to have a regular presence on the radio show because record stores are just information about music, and people that work in record stores are like encyclopedias. And Marion is definitely one of those people, and she could bring a lot to the show that was just really unique. But as I was doing the show, people in the music community started calling me up saying, can we come on the show and talk about our concert, our benefit, our new album? And originally I was kind of like, well, I guess I could make room in here somewhere. I won't play these songs. Erase that.
You better be grateful, gosh darn it.
I know. And then Abigail Henderson, who is one of the founders of the Midwest Music Foundation, she's no longer with us. She died of cancer, but she created the Midwest Music Foundation out of this idea of her own health care, because people did benefits to help her pay for her hospital bills. And she's like, why is it like this? We need to make something for everybody. So she founded the Midwest Music Foundation, and she was a regular guest on the Wednesday show. And she came on one Wednesday and was like, we like to think of this as our show. And I'm like, oh, you do? Yeah. Wait, no, that's the key. This is what it is. This is what I need to change my whole paradigm about all of this. This show doesn't belong to me. The show belongs to the music community. And I want to be one of those people that helps tell the story of what's happening in the music community of Kansas City, because it's a really great story. There's so many really amazing, beautiful things happening, and people are collaborating, and there's a spirit. And it really, for me, Midwest Music Foundation was sort of one of the seeds that helped grow our community, and all of us are working to build that community. It's like there's not this kind of competition that people maybe have felt in the past. There's more of a feeling of, let's go arm in arm up this hill together, and let's try to make a venue for everybody.
Sure.
Let's try to, and that's a really beautiful thing, and I think it's been one of the keys to Kansas City being so special. And it's kind of the spirit of how we are here. And so Abigail really did inspire me in that way. I love her, and she was one of those people that, someone would say, we have what's with the Kansas City music scene? And she's like, no, it's not a scene. God damn it. It's a community. You're going to call it a community. We have to, and she was really integral. She was really smart, and language creates reality. And, there's a huge difference between a scene and a community. And a community is where people are actually trying to help each other. And that's what I see happening in Kansas City. It's not all perfect, of course.
Right.
But it's like, for example, they recently did the Bowie tribute at the Record Bar. And that's just a really good example of collaboration between all these people from all these different bands.
3 freaking nights.
Yeah, and it's practically sold out every night, and I go to every single.
You do? Did you?
Yeah.
Oh man.
I've only missed 2 of their live performances ever,
because set lists are different, or
the set lists are different.
Okay. That's wild.
They're different.
It came out, and every time I would follow the link, hey, you might be interested, and it would only go to Thursday, and I was only available to go to Saturday, and by the time I got around to finding it was sold out, and I was like, but
no, it's true. Well, when something gets sold out, never give up totally,
right?
Because there's usually a way you can
usually
a way in.
Do you know Mark Kelpe by chance?
That sounds familiar to me.
He's like 50% of. They have a new name now. They used to be called Beer KC, but McCoy's Public House, Char Bar, Beer Kitchen, Meet Mitch. He's the back of the house, portion of that.
Gotcha.
And I worked for them for a number of years, and
I grew up in restaurants.
Okay,
so I'm fascinated by The Bear is my favorite TV show ever. It's like
so. He, and I was, I came to this operation of theirs with, back of the house management and running the kitchen and so forth, and so I had a pretty good knowledge of, the best ways to manage your food cost. and that ended up, unfortunately ish, giving me a reputation for, being a line Nazi and making sure that folks are, ringing things in correctly and not trying to pull a fast one and not get free stuff and not give free stuff away and blah, blah, blah. And
you gotta do that in the restaurant.
I know.
world.
And so one night it was a busy dinner service, and somebody ordered, I don't remember what it was, but it was like they ordered some sandwich with just like, there's no verbiage on the menu that would lend them to think that we have these things available. And I was just like, and Mark was at the bar and I didn't know, and he came through, and I'm running the kitchen up for this shift, and he come outside with me and takes me out in the alley. And he says, I know, we all work super hard to put together menus and to staff and train and do all the things that we do, and that cost is important. But even though this is the menu, this is the bridge between the kitchen and the dining customer, my dream is to have, regulars that could just come in and know that we're going to make them whatever it is that they want, whether it's a menu item or not. And I was like, fuck. I've put so much effort to control and negative but also positive energy into this thing, and it's like that backdraft scene, you're doing it wrong, and from it literally, changed my mind. It changed my perspective, and I was like, I would like to be a part of that too, but so
yeah,
it just it's sort of like we like to think of this as our show, and you're
right.
like, well, excuse me,
no.
But so the programmers that don't work the board, they produce it remotely and send it in.
No, they're there.
Oh, they come in and record.
No, they're doing it live.
Okay.
It's almost all done live.
Okay.
There's some shows that pre-record. We have some of our overnight programmers that the idea of doing a show from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. may not work in their life, so they'll pre-record their show.
Yeah.
But we have some that come in and do that live slot.
So KDUR FM 90.9, what is it? 91.9, 93.9 in Durango is a college community station. I went to Fort Lewis and had a show for 3 years. And I got to a spot where, it's a trimester. So there's 3 semesters across the calendar year, and every trimester ends, it's a new, right? And if there's folks that have been around, they're going to keep their slot. And, I think I know I took a 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Or maybe a midnight to 3 initially. And that carried a lot of weight that I was willing. And then eventually every go around, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to get. But it was great. I mean, there's the mental, kicking around of what your content's going to be. And then there's the physical, because, if it's not there, I got to bring it.
Right.
And so we had the 7 deadly words that you weren't allowed to say on air. We had PSAs in a 3-ring binder that were laminated, and you put them right there. And then we had carts.
Right.
You promo your own show, or maybe a local business doesn't want you to read it. They want to have it be their own thing.
Right.
And then specific times that we had to say the call. Right. And then that log piece sounds very familiar too. But it was fan freaking and above all, they really liked for the programming to warm up as the day did. So early was chill, jazz, whatever, and then by, anyway.
That's a good idea.
The primary rule was that you had to play 10 new tracks every show.
Well, that's good.
And the room was just floor to ceiling, wall to wall CDs, all with colored tape on the spine of the CD. And, green and yellow is avant-garde, and brown and is singer-songwriter. Black was new. So there's a whole section of new. And as long as you made it a point to squeeze in 10 new tracks. The rest of the content is yours. But it was like, I remember the idea, because I was like, oh, I'm going to join the newspaper staff, which I did because I was on the newspaper staff in high school. And I was like, that's a productive thing. I can probably a really good learning experience. And then immediately folks are in the room listening to the station. I was like, oh, I want to do that too. And just the idea of a college community radio station, I was like, it's probably the simplest operation you could ever imagine. Station manager, program director, a number of different roles.
Chief operator. Yeah.
Insane energy to the annual pledge drive,
right,
to raise money for all the things.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I was like, oh my God, this is a massive undertake to make this thing go out there in the world.
Yeah.
It was wild.
This thing we don't see. This invisible. Yeah.
But it was a really good time, and so I mean, I've
there's a lot of similarities between community radio and college radio.
Yeah,
really a lot.
Yeah,
playlists are similar in some ways too.
How so?
Just it's like new artists, like you said.
Yeah,
new, more alternative artists. College radio kind of has their finger on stuff that people don't know about sometimes yet, and it catches on to other. Become more popular. There's so many people that I love that I would never play on the radio because they're already played so much on TV and radio everywhere. And then again, there's other people that are like classic that, I do a tribute show to, there's an artist named Iris DeMent.
Yeah.
And she really got her musical start here in Kansas City.
She used to come play Durango all the time. I mean, the tail end of my time there, both station manager and program director were gals that were, I mean, like Iris DeMent, Ani DeFranco.
Right.
Yes. There was a lot of artists, not only like more than willing to come to Durango and play shows and spend a lot of time with folks at the station to broadcast.
We're the stations that play their music,
right?
Really,
right.
Yeah, exactly. Iris is she's in multiple benefit shows for KKFI over the years, and I just always wanted to repay her. So every year around the time of her birthday, I do a tribute to her.
Nice. And
she's also granted me lots of interviews, and she's a friend. I met her through Ann Winter at Recycled Sounds.
Okay.
But yeah, she put out a really good album last year.
Did she really?
Very political.
Oh.
Like one of her most political albums yet. And there's a song called Going Down to Texas where anybody can buy a gun. And it's like a multi-verse song that has a little political message with every verse.
Nice.
And it almost didn't get made, but she's married to a singer-songwriter named Greg Brown, who's a kind of a famous folk artist, also not played on mainstream at all, but widely known in the music world. And he was the original band director of Garrison Keillor's band in the early years, like for the first 15 years of that show.
Wow.
And then he left that and went on his own stuff. But he's from Iowa. And he married Iris, and she moved up to live with him from Kansas City.
Oh, funny.
He kind of lived here and there for a while when they first were dating. And she did a big benefit show for us in 2002 when we were trying to save the station. A whole story I could tell you about where we had this horrible manager that took over.
Oh, yeah.
And we literally formed programmers at KKFI formed a separate nonprofit group called Friends of Community Radio. And we had a benefit that Iris played, and Greg Brown opened for her. And it was at Unity Temple. We raised like $15,000 in one night.
Wow.
And I said, Iris, do you mind if every penny of this money is going to a lawyer? And she's like, whatever you need. She didn't take a cent.
That's cool.
She didn't take a cent, and did this amazing show. And Greg did an amazing show too. And then we hired a lawyer, and we filed a lawsuit against the board of directors of KKFI.
Oh my gosh.
While we were still doing radio shows.
And you're still there.
I'm still here. And we a lot of us were able to keep ourselves anonymous for a certain period of time. but it wasn't easy to do. And I was new. I had just started volunteering at KKFI, so I was like a new guy, and I didn't know people that well. And they elected me president of Friends of Community Radio, mainly because no one hated me yet. I was new. You know what I mean? And I showed up late for a meeting because I'd broken my arm. I ran a garden program in schools in KCK for 25 years, and I broke my arm in a garden with kids one time. And I showed up late. I'm like, "You're president." But we won.
KCK Organic Teaching?
Yeah, the KCK Organic Teaching Gardens. And
that's you don't do that anymore.
I finished that work last December.
Oh, okay.
I decided to end it after all these years. I just was at a point in my life where I loved that job. I really did. It was a passion project for me. I never planned on teaching middle school kids about gardening. That wasn't in
raised bed gardens on campuses.
We built raised bed gardens right on the school grounds of 3 middle schools and 4 elementary schools in KCK. And then we developed a whole curriculum around those gardens. And we brought that curriculum into the classrooms of all those schools and did monthly workshops in 1st, 4th, and 6th grades.
Cool.
And through September to May, and we did 3 harvests a year, 3 plantings a year. The students built the gardens. I had them build the gardens and plant the gardens and harvest the gardens. And we would give over $10,000 of food away to the neighborhoods around the gardens every year, and did about 400 workshops a year in classrooms. I would go into a middle school and do like 6 classes on a Tuesday, 6 classes on a Thursday, and then go to the next middle school and do 6 classes to serve all of those classes.
And raised bed because...
And raised beds because a lot of times the ground is really rough,
Okay.
Raised beds...
It's a little bit more protective of the contents.
Yeah, you can create a defined, uniform look to a garden that school districts like, because it makes their school look nice and it doesn't look like a bunch of stuff crazily growing. There's a sense of order in it, and I spent a great deal of time making them look beautiful. And we did, like, some of the gardens were 12 beds and some of them were 18 beds, and the beds were 4 foot by 12 foot, and we would have native beds and we'd have butterfly beds.
Those are not small.
No, these were good. These were big. I mean, building them was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And
I built 12 years ago. I built one here, and it was, not even close. It was a rectangular shape, and it kind of ran along one wall of the back of the house. And I'm not a super handy guy, so I mean, it wasn't difficult, but it wasn't just like bam, bam, bam. It took a minute to put it together.
Right. And these are, and it's really funny when you have like 250 6th graders helping you. I mean, in terms of like shoveling soil into wheelbarrows and hauling it into beds, you kind of want to have 250 6th graders helping you, and they're only working in like 40-minute periods, and so they're not going to, because the attention span of students, you really have to have things in more limited capacity. They're just not at a place yet to like go out and work 8 hours in the field.
Right.
That's
with
not going to happen.
Sunscreen and snacks and a meal.
Right. It's just not going to happen that way. But yeah, it was a really great experience for me because my background was in theater. Mm-hmm. I was literally working in a theater, and the next thing I know, I'm working in KCK at Argentine Middle School.
Oh,
or Banneker Elementary or Quindaro Elementary.
I was a case manager for Paces of Wyandotte.
Okay.
And for 3 years.
All right.
So it was like I'm either in the community with kids or in their homes or in their schools. So I became very familiar.
Yeah.
And Argentina, I was officed out of 37th and Metropolitan.
Okay.
Right in the heart of.
All right.
Anyway.
Yeah, we had gardens in Rosedale at the Frank Rushton Elementary School, and at Rosedale Middle School, and then Argentine Middle School, and then over at Quindaro Elementary and Banneker Elementary, and Northwest Middle School, which now has a new name, and also Emmy Pearson Elementary, the largest elementary school. We just, right before I left, I built a brand new garden at their school, kind of as a way of my swan song to leaving, because they needed a new garden. And we had originally had to build our garden in this really bad location because the PE teacher wouldn't let us build it where we wanted it to. There was this perfect spot with fences, but she did a relay race there once a year.
Oh man,
she wouldn't, and you know how some schools a certain teacher has power because they've been there a while.
That's the first place my mind went.
So
a lot of power for a PE teacher.
So, but right before I left, we commandeered this. That PE teacher was gone, and I was like, "Well, we need to raise money to build this garden." And people don't realize that schools are strapped and that they're overworked, you know. And
how do people not realize that?
Yeah, it's like people think it's just like, well, why can't they just do it? So I did a GoFundMe and we raised $10,000.
Wow.
And that paid for the lumber and the soil because that stuff is expensive.
Yeah.
Lumber is so expensive now,
especially now,
more than ever, and
triple what we were used to it being for, you know, and it just kind of never just stayed there.
Yeah, right. After COVID, the price of it just. It's crazy, really crazy. But we got a bunch of different volunteers to help us, and we built this beautiful new garden there. And it's perfect because they have like 5 fourth grade classes there and like 5 first grade classes.
Dang.
And when I would do workshops there, I'd be doing workshops for about 300 people total over a day, and just getting all of them in the garden. And we harvested so many sweet potatoes. That's our big crop.
Okay.
We harvested, oh goodness, maybe like almost 1,000 pounds of sweet potatoes out of that garden. I mean, huge, beautiful, big.
Yeah, it's number ones,
it
jumbos.
was so much fun to watch kids dig up sweet potatoes.
I bet. Is that why that crop? Why?
Because you can plant it in May and come back and harvest it in October.
Okay.
We needed to find a way to. Gardens are at their height when everyone's away for the summer, and a lot of summer programming has been cut out of schools' budgets. Over the years, and there will be a day, I think, when school will go year round. I feel like that's a trend that will happen sometime in the future, especially in certain places. Like, for example, MU Pearson, Christmas break is coming up, and I look to this room full of students, like, say there's like 70 fourth graders in this classroom with me, and I'm like, is everybody getting excited about Christmas break? We've got 2 weeks off. And they're all like, no, we don't want to go. We want to stay here. And I realized that to them, this school is so much more than a school.
So many folks in KCK are getting at least breakfast and lunch.
Right, at least. And
structure,
a snack. Yeah.
A snack.
They're getting love. They're getting counseling. They're getting clothing. They're getting so much, and that school serves a huge, diverse population.
Yes,
in a neighborhood that has a lot of different challenges, you know, and all of those kids, my heart goes out to them. And in that moment of me going, "You're all happy about the," and I get this reaction that I almost start crying because I realize, you know, like people of privilege don't even begin to imagine what it's not like to be. You know what I mean? People have no idea. And
I have 13 and 10 are my kids, and phone and Xbox were not just the biggest presents that they got, you know.
Right.
One of many. And like some of those kids have probably never actually create, you know, or maybe they've at one point created a true, authentic Christmas list with hope and optimism, and then abandoned it because it's not. Right. You know what I'm saying?
No, and everybody has a sense of pride about their family and their neighborhood and where they live, and that's why you have to be careful about like the term at-risk youth, because it's like, well, that's my neighborhood. I live there. What are you talking about? Are you talking down about where I live? You know, it's like with the whole sweet potato thing, we did this whole story about where potatoes come from, and we did a comparison between regular potatoes and sweet potatoes, and this whole story of like white potatoes, because potatoes originally came from the Andes Mountains of Peru, and they grow 4,000 different kinds of what we think of as white potatoes.
Right.
And our market has narrowed that down to like 8 in the grocery store.
Is it 8?
Or 6 or even less?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you sell 4,000 things, And so, but in the Andes Mountains, the advantage is that if 1 or 2 don't grow very well, you have all the others to harvest. When you have variety, you're going to have a better harvest.
Sure.
And plus, the variety is the spice of life, and plants are a species that competes, and the strongest survive, the weaker die out. Well, the largest consumer of potatoes is McDonald's. They buy more potatoes than anybody in the world, but they only buy one kind of potato, and that's the Burbank russet. So it forces Idaho farmers to grow one variety of plant in the field year after year after year.
It's got to be a challenge.
It's a challenge because it becomes inbred. It's breeding within itself, and we know that that's not healthy.
Aren't you supposed to move around and plant new things here and then move it to there?
It helps to rotate crops.
Yes.
Yeah, and to plant a variety of things, not just one kind of potato. Because when McDonald's first started, they used many different kinds of potatoes for their fries. But as they grew and wanted that consistency, that restaurant,
like their fountain Coke,
you would have the same kind of fry at this McDonald's, then you go over here and you want the same kind of fry.
Yeah, I mean, and then the CO2 and the syrup for their fountain, it's like a specific. You're not getting that on anywhere else,
right? It's a special thing, and so those potato farmers in Idaho end up having to use gallons and gallons of pesticides.
Oh boy!
The only way that plant will survive, because it's a weakling plant, it can't survive on its own at this point. It's inbred, and so it only survives by killing everything else around it. Huh. And literally they kill everything in the soil, like no
nutrients.
Yeah, it's
whatever.
Weird. And it just means more water usage is wrong, and it's bad farming, and it's sameness on the plate means sameness in the field. And like really great restaurants, you talk about being from restaurant worlds, the really great chefs and really great restaurants work with farmers in the area, and they plan their menus seasonally. But a lot of fast food isn't like that.
There's for every like one of those,
right.
There's 10 that are like, I will only buy Kennebecs, and I will only whoever's price is cheapest.
Yeah.
And so then they have like 3 broadline distributors parking semis, and then however many other smaller vendor. It's just like,
yeah, right. It's crazy. It's, I don't know. And we got to tell that story with our sweet potato thing. But I realized that I was like talking bad about McDonald's to a group of students where that's like, people are living in food deserts, and that's like a special occasion to go to McDonald's. So I had to temper what I was doing because I was offending people.
Like, dang it, Christmas lists, McDonald's.
It's like, it's like being a pompous ass.
Right.
It's like, who am I, and we're a really good lesson in, when you work with middle school kids, it's an ego check at the door anyway. It's like, if you think you're going to give a big speech, you better think twice, because it's a negotiation, and you're going to have to humble yourself, or you're going to be humbled.
Yes.
Just going to be humbled, because you got kids. They're learning how to socialize, and they're asking really interesting questions that can be offensive sometimes.
That's really cool though.
I had to really figure that out as I went along, just how all that worked out. But sweet potatoes got to tell the whole other side of the story. The reason we grow sweet potatoes is because of George Washington Carver saving the cotton industry. Because cotton was being planted in the same soil year after year after year. It was ruining the soil, and they weren't getting the same yield because it just took all the nutrients out of the soil. What puts nutrients back in the soil? Sweet potatoes.
Really?
You grow sweet potatoes, they can grow in bad soil, and they'll make that soil better.
Wow.
They will.
Cool.
And it's the magic. And then later peanuts were introduced for the same reason. They bring nitrogen back into the soil. Oh. And it's a very easy crop to grow too. It takes very little maintenance. It's very, low water, but a very easy crop to grow. They have a vinage system that looks beautiful, and they have flowers, and then you can get a lot of food from a small area of land. Potatoes saved Europe from starvation when the Spanish came over and took all these foods back to Europe. potatoes could grow in Russia in the colder climates, and people were getting vitamin C for the first time ever.
Weird.
Because of the potato.
Yeah.
I mean, they were having diseases from not having vitamin C in their life, and they don't have citrus there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the potato, I mean, and then Ireland also, potatoes were a way to feed a lot of hungry big families, and add a little milk to the potato. You get vitamin D in there with all the vitamins in the potato. It's enough to keep you alive. And the only thing is, like, the Irish planted one kind of potato, and they didn't plant a variety. So when the famine happened, it knocked out all their plants, and they had nothing. And that's another lesson in variety.
Yeah.
You know, and also there's like political aspects to that whole famine story that people don't tell.
I mean,
religious and political. Yeah, it was a genocide.
Yes. Yeah.
Really
calculated.
I
mean,
because there was enough food in like the UK to feed those people, but my
well, and you know, but there was also you know, land acquisition, and then like, okay, if I bought these 100 acres, you get 1.5, and it's going to cost you X, and then that price keeps, or you've got to produce potatoes, and if you don't, then there can be consequences, and enough of that, and eventually the thing just crumbles, tips over, kills people, genocide.
I'm a descendant of Irish Catholic Democrat, you know,
County Cork,
that, you know, came here because of the potato famine. And I would tell this workshop, and I'm here today to talk to you about the potato because of the potato, you know. And that's the story of plants. Who's in charge? Do we control them, or do they control us? And yeah, it's I love that part. So
you just 6 weeks ago?
No, a year ago.
A year ago. Okay.
Yeah, there had been a thing that happened in the community last December that sort of shook me a little bit to my core, and it kind of forced me to, like, I don't know, turn the page in my life in a way. And so I was like, I can't go to Argentine middle school and do a worm workshop anymore. After all these years of doing it, I can't. And I had been really struggling with finding funding for the program, and begging people and begging the school board, and just really falling on deaf ears, and people that say, yeah, we'll get back to you. It's like, I don't have time for you to get back to me. I don't have time to wait for a year for you to figure it out. I need it now.
But did you say that it's in new hands now and still survive?
I found the farm school at Gibbs Road is a nonprofit organization. A group of women from KCK and around bought the old grounds that used to be Cultivate KC.
Okay.
And then they've bought additional land in that area. And they do a whole educational program on their site with student groups that come in. But the idea of growing gardens on the school grounds is sort of a new part that they're just now embarking on, because they've agreed to take over my old program. And so I sort of left it in the hands of their executive director.
Okay. Now, are they hitting you up every week with?
No, they're not.
Okay.
And I kind of wanted to just have a clean break from it all. And I don't want to get in their way either.
Right.
But I just sort of I had a whole series of meetings with them in my last year, where like the first meeting is like, we're about 33% sure we could do this. And the next meeting was a little bit better. They were meeting with all their people and meeting with the school board. And then on the last meeting, it was like, we're 100% sure we can do this. And I just sort of walked away, and I haven't gone to any of the gardens. I can't do that right now.
No.
I don't know, when you put that much of yourself into a project and you build something from nothing and create it and then have to walk away from it, it's bittersweet. It's really
well, and what are the chances of you rolling up on one of your gardens and just being like 1,000% stoked with you know, and then you'd be like, oh, right?
Well, yeah, I don't know, I'm going through a process of like moving into a different direction, because I never really planned to do that. It was not in my trajectory at all. And then 25 years pass, you know what I mean? It's like I've become an old person, you know. And
now is there some gardening that happens at home?
There have been in the past, but not lately.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah.
So are you born and raised in the area, or
I'm from Nebraska.
Nebraska?
I'm from a small town in Nebraska.
Okay.
And all my ancestors are poor immigrant farmers.
Okay.
From, like Sweden and
Sure.
and Norway and places like that
Yeah.
that came here and got a homestead and or lived in a dugout or raised
Right.
7 kids on a farm with
Yeah.
no running water.
Do you have siblings?
I have 2 younger sisters,
Okay.
and I've had various step siblings. Sure. My parents have both been married 3 times each. I've been in all of their weddings.
Hey,
Even the first. I was just a what's the stage when you're like almost like cells in a woman's body?
right?
I can't think of it.
Yeah.
I was the cause of their wedding, put it that way.
Yeah. So how did they meet?
My mom and dad. On a date. I think
Okay.
people set them up on a date.
Okay.
And my mom had been dating a different person who then at the last minute broke up with her and gave an engagement ring to another person.
Oh, wow.
And then she was kind of jilted. She was like 18, she was young, just out of high school and getting ready to go to like teachers college in Nebraska or something. And she's from a family of 7 and she's kind of just a rough and tumble. She had 4 older brothers.
Okay.
So she was always out there. Like as a child, she was this parent that built a baseball diamond across the street from our house and organized a whole baseball thing in our neighborhood with all the kids, and helped build a backstop. And my mom made that happen, like she would take everybody in our neighborhood to the swimming pool on the family pass or something, so that people could use their entry fee to buy something at the Dairy Queen afterwards. It was like that. She was that kind of a mom.
Yeah.
Like if I got in trouble and took off running, my mom would chase after me and catch me and tackle me. You know what I mean? She was that kind of a mom. Yeah, she got pregnant by my dad and got married in like December. And went to like the Badlands for their honeymoon.
Wow.
Can you imagine going to the Badlands in the middle of winter on your honeymoon? How romantic is that? But yeah.
Chilly. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, so were they together for a chunk of time or no?
They got a divorce when I was around 11.
11. Okay.
Yeah. And it was a turbulent marriage. It was not happy.
Yeah.
And I was the oldest child, so I kind of witnessed a lot of it.
Sure.
And they were kids themselves.
Yeah.
I look back on it and think of like I have some horrific memories in my mind and I can remember everything really well. But I have to like put it through a filter of like, God, how old was my dad when that actually happened?
Right.
He was like 23 when that happened, or 24. I can't imagine if I would have been able to handle it better. And that, they didn't know how to be parents. They both had dads that died early.
Okay.
And my dad had this Irish Catholic mom who was like a saint, and she had him when she was 36.
Oh, wow.
And her own husband was a bit of a gambler, and they lived in this town called Wausau, Nebraska. And one day she just up and moved back to this town of Exeter. She, with her own money, bought a house and said, if you want to come live with us, you can, but she just like took charge. Like she knew she could because she'd been an independent woman, and she got a job working at this highway cafe and worked there for years.
Wow.
She was an amazing cook, but she'd been a hairstylist before that. And I mean, her husband was like a veteran of the war, but he was a bit of a gambler. There's a lot about him I don't know because he died when my dad was 16.
Okay.
But she was the kind of mom that, like, my dad had a paper route, and all the people that he delivered papers to were calling the house saying, we haven't gotten our paper for like a week now. What's going on? And she's like, no, Tommy wouldn't do that. Not our Tommy. And then my grandma's out mowing the lawn of her house, and she sees out of the corner of her eye, underneath the porch of the house, stacks and stacks of newspapers. So you know what she does?
Goes and delivers them herself.
Exactly. That's the kind of mom she was.
Okay.
She wrapped them all with rubber bands and went and delivered them all to all the people for her Tommy.
Wow.
My dad.
Now, did they were mom and dad into music, and were they playing music in the home for you guys to listen to?
My mom had a record collection.
Okay.
That I discovered in first grade. She had an old stereo in our basement, and she had a bunch of records. And
it put away.
They were
not out for.
They
use.
were out in the open.
Okay.
They were out in the open, and they were
in use.
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I put them to use. I mean, and it was like The Fifth Dimension was a band that she had.
Okay.
She was part of a record club, so she was getting stuff that maybe she didn't. But the Carpenters were in the mix.
That I know.
Engelbert Humperdinck.
Yes.
There was like a Cher album in there, and then like Meet the Beatles.
Yep.
A real scratchy Meet the Beatles album. Those are sort of my first like putting a needle down and going, oh my God, wow. And I remember for my second grade talent show, I sang Close to You by the Carpenters.
Okay.
To my second grade class, and I won. I got tied for first, and but I learned how to sing the song phonetically. So I wasn't, when you're a second grader, you're like 8 years old. You really don't know all the words. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're just sort of like playing along. And so I learned to sing it like Karen. Karen has pretty good diction, but in my own learning it, I was singing Why Do Birds Suddenly a Thee?
Yeah.
And I remember my mom, and she was like, sing that song for your cousins. She'd like go overboard, like sing that. And then my cousins from California were visiting. I was like, Why Do Birds? And they started laughing at me. And they're like, you're singing it all wrong. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And they're like, yeah, it's not suddenly a fee. It's suddenly up here. And I'm like,
Will you get up here and do it then?
No, it's like when you're a second grader, you do the best you can.
I mean, nothing even remotely close to that, but like just little one-line dorky jokes or impressions. Like I would do those around my mom and sister, and then company would be over, and she'd, hey, and I'm like,
right,
what are you doing? That's not. That's just this.
No, Mom.
Absolutely
that's
not.
My mom was so much like that.
God.
Do your little act for him. Come on. Like you're a trained seal or something.
Yeah. Show me my treat first. And maybe.
Right. No, there's none of that. No.
Wow.
Yeah, and my mom's, and the funny thing is, I've created monologues about these things in performance because my background is in theater. But my mom, when she married her third husband, Arlo, who's this great guy, they've been married for like 30 some odd years now, and he's actually turning 94 in a few weeks.
Wow.
He's a little bit older than my mom, but he had 5 children from his first marriage of 25 years. So for their wedding, they thought, let's have all the kids stand up with us. So there's his 5 kids and me and my 2 sisters standing up in this church. And my mom asked that we sing We've Only Just Begun by the Carpenters.
Okay.
I mean, how ironic. It's like, we've only just begun. My mom's third wedding. What's going on here?
I promise there's going to be at least 6 more of these.
Weddings are so crazy.
They are.
It's like, who thinks these things up? My God.
And the price tag associated of putting one on is
right.
I mean, whatever.
No, it's crazy.
So some of how about in the car? Are you guys listening to any memories of listening to stuff in the car?
Yeah, well, I remember radio being big in the car, and then also on the school bus. Like bus drivers used to play the radio on the school bus, and we'd have to go to field trips and drive home, and they'd have it on. For me, WOW, which was Omaha, it was an Omaha AM station at the time. It's now a country western station, but it was WOW, and it was a top 40 station.
Okay.
In like the 70s and early 80s, and I love top 40. I feel like I still program the Wednesday Midday Medley show in a top 40 format because I'm playing all local artists. So I'm playing like a folk song and a hip hop song and a rock song and maybe a slightly country-ish. I mean, and that's kind of how top 40 was. You could hear Daryl Hall, John Oates, Dolly Parton, Aerosmith. Yeah. You hear all these bands strung together. And it was just what was popular at the time. And everybody loved it, you know. And it's not like that anymore. No. It's all classified in different ways, and people don't listen to music according to genre. I think people want good music.
Yeah.
And I think variety is better than not variety. And so I like mixing it up. That's the concept of the radio show I do. But it's local artists mixed with national artists, but new releases is sort of the thrust, which can be challenging because you're playing music that maybe no one's heard before yet.
Right.
It's a newer song.
Yeah.
But
in the age of the largest attention span ever.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I feel like I'm doing it in a top 40 way, which is how the radio I grew up in was like, and I like that. And I was a real nerdy kid that my dad would like take me and my sisters on a fishing trip somewhere, and they'd actually be out fishing, and I'd be in the cab of his truck writing down all of the like Casey Kasem's American's Top 40.
Yeah.
I'm like writing down, I have to write this down. I have to know what's number 2 this week. What's the biggest jump in the countdown? You know, it was like my thing. I have these old notebooks filled with
nice. Or
lots
when
of,
he would do the
long distance dedication.
Yes,
right.
Yes, Sherry from San Fernando Valley and Roger from Cheyenne.
Right, exactly.
So you have these handful of records from Mom's collection, which is your first, needle on the record moments, and then way down the line, you have your own taste, your own collection, and from which you gave me a list, but somewhere in the middle when these are Mom's, and was there an album that you discovered that was like your first album love, or maybe one that was the first one you bought with your own money, or one that was the foundation of your own collection that stands out?
Yeah, it seems like when my mom and dad divorced, we moved to the bad side of town. Every town has a bad side.
Yeah.
And we were across the railroad tracks near the beef packing plant. I had to go
picture it.
I had to go to the elementary school that everyone was scared to go to, and all the tough kids went to that school. And I ended up loving all of those kids the most.
Oh, nice.
Like growing up in high school and going back for reunions, I wanted to be with those people because they were like the most real to me. But they're kind of like the Stony Loaders who like were into Led Zeppelin and Leonard Skinner.
Yeah.
They knew about those bands. But I started buying 45s from a neighbor that was selling them for like a nickel or 10 cents, just trying to get rid of stuff. And then there was a record store that opened that only sold 45s.
Oh, wow. And
they had like the top 10 every week in there. And I just started accumulating a huge 45 collection. And I would number them and put my name on them, and all of them have like Mark written on them, so it's kind of stupid. But then I grew up a little bit and started buying albums.
Yeah. And
my very first album was Queen: A Night at the Opera.
Oh, wow.
And I remember working for my dad was a concrete worker.
Okay.
He's like 81 and still laying concrete.
Isn't there like a guaranteed portion of misery that comes along with being a concrete worker?
There's
it's not easy.
No, and there's a certain, when the concrete truck rolls up and starts beeping to back up, your dad becomes a different person or my dad became a different person because there's only so much time to get the concrete into the place and finish it before it dries.
Yeah.
And there's an art to it.
Hence the reason it's always moving, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like I worked for his company for a couple of years, and I worked my ass off.
I bet.
I was in really great shape because on your first day of work, move that pile of sand from there to here. And you're like, okay, sure. And after you do that, you feel it, It's like,
ooh, I didn't know I had those muscles.
I mean, when I was in this basement and the concrete, chute is coming through a basement window, and everything in the basement has rebar and sand and forms, and there's this little board to keep your wheelbarrow tire on it, and you have to fill the wheelbarrow with concrete in this corner where it's coming in, and then pick it up and move it over to this other end and dump it. And I'm like down there, like, okay, whatever. And the concrete comes in so hard that it flips the wheelbarrow over, knocks me down. The concrete's coming onto my body, and I'm on the ground, and I'm expecting someone to like go, oh, that poor guy, help him. But it's not that. It's like, well, he's like, you're like whipped out of their way. It's like, get to work, do this right.
Yeah.
Wake up. Because usually they start fairly early in the day, and it was I learned a lot.
I bet.
On that job, I learned a whole lot.
My two good buddies that were ultimately managing editor and editor-in-chief of the college newspaper did, and they would always draw parallels to pouring concrete to running a newspaper. And it was always so fascinating.
Interesting.
To me. But always, riddled in tales of accidents and tempers and hard work and so forth.
Right.
But your dad's doing that, and
my dad was doing that. I just remember a memory because my dad had all these college guys that worked for him, and I was kind of this queer kid from a small town that was like not still in the closet, but not even able to figure it all out. But I had these really hot college guys working for him, and I'm like this 11-year-old nerd, totally. And they're like talking about music, and they're like, and I was also the boss's kid. I mean, I worked for my dad in college, and it was a different experience. But,
sure.
But when I was 11 and working for my dad over the summer, the guys that work for him were like, yeah, he's the boss's kid, whatever. That was that kind of a...
Yeah.
So I didn't really get much respect from anybody, and that's okay. I wasn't there to make friends, but they're like, what kind of music do you like? And I'm like, well, I like Queen. And like, there was sort of an idea that sure you do, right? There was kind of Queen even on Bohemian Rhapsody, for example. I guess maybe some people in Nebraska thought that maybe they were kind of a gay band, maybe, or something. Even then,
Really?
Yeah, isn't that weird? I felt judged kind of by these college guys that my favorite band was Queen,
Huh.
But
I don't. I feel like
Freddie Mercury was very flamboyant,
of course, but they shredded. They were
no. I hear you. I hear you. And that was an era when people were gay, but people didn't talk about being gay. Charles Nelson Riley and Paul Lynde and all these people. They were so gay, but they weren't labeled that.
Right.
Or it was somehow safe. I don't know how to describe it.
No,
it was just not talked about.
I just feel like, like Queen is the radio hits of Queen, I should say.
Yeah.
Part of my fabric from a very small, and then it's like the mid to late 80s are here, and it's like there are gay people, and AIDS and Freddie Mercury, and now he's dead. And it was just kind of like, whoa, pump the brakes.
No, I hear you.
Are you sure about all that? Like,
Yeah, exactly. The information that we had was, because Queen was kind of in a way on the end of glam rock. In a way, they still were playing a little bit with the idea of glam rock too.
Right.
And I was real attracted to glam rock, and I've always thought it was. Glam rock to me was kind of like punk rock, and it's like, let's take rock back to the basics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll never forget.
We're just gonna dress up like gay male prostitutes while we do it. You know what I mean?
It might sell some records,
Right. I mean, the New York Dolls, whatever. But
I was, this isn't like any large bit of bragging rights, but I knew, like, I was the AM Oldie station into the land of classic rock, where I like in both camps. I was even as a young person, kind of a student, and like I want to know more.
Right.
And eventually, like, I just thoroughly burned myself out on classic rock, and there's a lot of songs now where I'm like, turn it off. I don't want to hear that. Heard it too many times.
Right.
But point of the story is that I knew Bohemian Rhapsody well before Wayne's World.
Yes,
and
me too.
And coming back from a friend's family invited me to their Ozark Lake house for the weekend, and we stopped at I'm pretty sure it was a Pizza Hut with the red carpet and the red tumblers and the lamps and the buffet and the whole 9 yards.
Right.
And there's a jukebox, and I always had go over there and flip the pages of the machine, and in actual print, just the way every other track and artist was listed, Queen, Bohemian, new word, R-A-P, new word, C-I-T-Y. And I was like, what is going on here? Like, how did this make it out of the press and into the mail and into this jukebox and into this? I was like, this is just blast,
Yeah.
I can't even believe it.
Wow.
But anyway.
Was it the song?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was this, but it just thought it was Rap City. I was like, well, we are kind of, just down.
I never thought that's kind of a new idea. For
Yeah. So Night at the Opera is the first one you bought with
that was
your
my
own?
first album.
Okay.
And I basically was at an Elko discount store in our town that sold stereos.
Oh.
And they had a few vinyl in there, not a lot, but they had
Yeah.
some, and they were just playing that on the stereo, and that's a great album to test a stereo out
For
with,
sure. For sure.
And I just heard it, and I was like, I can't believe what I'm hearing. I have to buy this record.
Yeah.
Some records are like that.
Yes.
The Cars' first record I heard in a stereo store like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I have to buy this
Yeah,
record.
I'm pretty sure the Cars was on Patrick Spray's list.
It's
I'm
such
pretty
a
sure.
good...
It is.
I
And
mean-
I was like, this is going to be just, I don't know why sometimes, trend in the direction of negativity, and it's like, this is going to be like 2 or 3 radio hits and then a bunch of filler. And I was like, dude,
Right.
this thing is stacked.
Yeah.
It's just crushers.
No, it's really...
Yeah, great record.
Great. Everybody loved it. It was so cool. And I don't know. It's weird how you get introduced to music because Nebraska radio is pretty white also. Like diversity in my hometown was like, are you Swedish or Irish? You know what I mean? That's basically what it is. And it wasn't really until NAFTA that there was really any kind of influx of like what's happening in KCK, for example, with like,
Right.
a Latin population, but all the beef packing plants and places like that, more minority folk came in to take on those jobs. And there'd be a little bit more diversity in the town, but not much. But the women's prison for Nebraska was in my hometown.
Oh, wow.
And when my mom divorced my dad, she got a job there. And she had to work like weird shifts because she was a new employee. And they would let your kids come to work on holidays. So, and my mom had to work a lot of the holidays because she was a newer employee there. So I went to the women's prison on Mother's Day and Easter and a lot of holidays like that. I would go with her to the prison and hang out there all day. And I met prisoners and became friends with some. Like I knew Carol Fugate, who was part of the Charles Starkweather murder spree of Nebraska.
Wow.
I met her and she actually went to our church too, and it was this wonderful person, a really nice, amazing person. But the women had portable little stereos, kind of like you have in high schools, and they were playing their own records, and that's where I first heard Al Green.
Oh.
Let's Stay Together. And I'm like, what is that? I've never heard anything like that before. And I saw the record album cover and I was able to like connect it. And the first time I was able to buy that in a record store, like in Lincoln or Omaha, I like got that record. And then my mom was part of like I said, a record club that would send you out.
Yeah.
And it was the time of 8 tracks.
Okay.
Because I've lived through all the different variations.
Oh, yeah.
So, and my mom would sometimes forget to send it back or write. They would send it, if you didn't send back the card, they would send you the music and then say, now you owe us for it. And she got the 8-track soundtrack to Superfly.
Oh, wow.
Curtis Mayfield. And I fell in love with that music too at a younger age where I just was like, this is really, Curtis Mayfield is one of my favorite artists. But other than that, Nebraska's pretty white. The radio, it was like,
it looks like it would be.
it was like
pretty
very
white.
much REO Speedwagon when I grew up. It's like, I can't handle that band. Like when New Wave happened when I went to college, and it was like this breakthrough for music.
Sure. Did you watch Ozark?
No.
The show?
No.
No?
Uh-uh.
Oh my
I've never
God.
seen Ozark.
Oh,
Is that crazy?
so good.
I have to check it out then.
So, but in one of the later seasons, they're trying to have a fundraiser, a big fundraiser, and they bring REO Speedwagon. And I was like, this is a joke. And then sure, I was like, God damn! I mean, it fits. I bet the folks that lived in the Ozarks love them some REO Speedwagon.
Right, exactly. They're so big. Oh my God.
Have you seen? I've kind of been like in small little pockets on TikTok. And it's like you get in and you can't get out, and you go, oh, I gotta pull back and not. But it's the algorithm is it is the best of all of them in terms of recognizing what you like and then giving you more of it, which makes it so hard to get it. Oh God,
right. Check your phone in the morning and 2 hours go by.
Yeah. But there, a few months ago when I was in one of these pockets where I was on TikTok a lot, there was a clip going around of Chicago in a comfy looking recording studio, covering an Al Green song, and Al Green walks in, and they're like, "What the fuck?" And he's like, "I heard you guys," because he was across the way doing whatever, and he hears them playing. And he's like, "Do you mind if we just take it from the top?" And I knew Chicago wasn't a 3-member unit. I knew they were bigger than that, but I don't think I knew how many people were in it. And they're all like, "Yeah, we could do that." And so they start, and it pans from like the drummer to the bass player to the guitarist, and every single one of them just ear to ear. And Al's just, they're like, "This is so amazing. I can barely manage my responsibility with this instrument right now."
That's funny.
It's really cool.
I love it. Yeah, he's fabulous, amazing.
Absolutely.
I've never seen him live, but he has played Kansas City.
Sure.
And did a show at the Midland like maybe 10 years ago that people said was amazing.
Wow. Wow.
It's like going to church.
Yeah.
The Reverend Al Green.
I want to pause real quick and use
Sure.
the restroom.
Yeah. Definitely.
Anyway,
it's registering up here.
Queen, Night at the Opera. What about shows? Have you been a concert goer a lot of your life?
I tried to.
Okay.
Yeah, I try to go to shows and concerts and whenever I can, as much as I can.
Is there a first or one that stands out from youth?
From youth, a lot of my early, my high school librarian was a friend of mine who took me to Harry Chapin concert.
Oh, wow. Why do I know Harry Chapin's name?
He wrote Cats in the Cradle,
Yes.
The Silver Spool.
Yes.
But he wrote a lot of other songs too.
Of course.
He wrote Taxi.
Yeah.
And he had a band that he toured with, and he was on the road like 3/4 of the year he was on the road touring, and he donated so much of his money to the World Hunger Fund.
Oh, cool.
And he lobbied Congress and the president and worked on all these hunger issues, and was like just this really amazing guy who had his heart in the right place, and he had a song about the radio called WOLD, about this morning DJ, and he wrote these story songs.
Cool.
And his band was really good. His brother on piano and this big bass player who sang a falsetto voice and did like specialty background vocals. And it was a good I'd never been to a concert quite like that before, and my high school librarian took me to it when I was I think I was like a sophomore in high school or freshman in high school. It was like 1978 or so. He had written the lyrics to the sequel to Taxi, but it hadn't released that because he put out a sequel to Taxi.
Okay.
And he'd only written the lyrics. So for the encore, he came out and read the lyrics to the audience. And,
weird.
As part of his encore. But that was a memorable early concert. There was lots of state fair concerts that my dad took me to that I hated, like the Statler Brothers or Pat Boone and Debbie Boone or whatever, things like that.
My dad had a 24 8-track little briefcase in his van, and it was like, 95% of it was John Denver and the Oak Ridge Boys.
Yeah,
and I was like,
right.
There's more than 2 artists. Okay, fine.
Nebraska, Omaha had, at the time I was growing up, Rosenblatt Stadium was a baseball stadium that a lot of concerts were at.
Okay.
And I saw like the Beach Boys and Pat Benatar.
Oh, wow.
And Heart.
Yeah.
And a bunch of different bands there. And in college I saw the Police Ghost in the Machine tour.
Okay, where'd you go to school?
I went to school in a small liberal arts college in Nebraska called Doane College. It's
Doane.
Doane.
Doane. Okay.
Thomas Doane. He started Doane College. He was a railroad guy. There's a whole strip of towns in Nebraska that are like, they just went A, B, C, D, E, and gave them a European. It's like Exeter, Friend, Geneva, that kind of thing. And Doane College is in Crete. I was born in Geneva and schooled in Crete, Nebraska. Mm-hmm. So, it's like a 700 student college, private liberal arts college, beautiful campus, kind of a little oasis in the middle of this
cool
farming community.
Yeah.
With a lot of Czechoslovakian immigrant farmers and a huge high suicide rate amongst farmers in this county. It's a little bit outside of Lincoln. It'd be like a 35-minute drive to go to Lincoln to go to something more of like a city.
Sure.
And we did that a lot. But and then Omaha was farther down the road. I grew up in a town called York, Nebraska, which is about 45 miles west of Lincoln, right where Interstate 80 and Highway 81 kind of intersect.
Okay.
Small 7,000 population. And my mom's family was from a town just south of that called McCool Junction, like 200 people.
Wow.
That's where I originally came from, McCool Junction. And
how did you ultimately wind up in KC?
And I wound up in KC just like a lot of queer kids in small towns. You kind of go to the biggest city. But I had a really good friend from my hometown, Michael Mastro Caesar. His family was from here originally. His uncle was Tolly, who had a restaurant down in Columbus Park called Tolly's.
Oh.
And originally it was they built a highway right over it, basically, and they did the interstate. And then he moved over to where the Italian restaurant Garozzo's.
Yeah.
Before that was Garozzo's. It was
Chicken Spadini began.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Tolly's was there before Garozzo's.
Okay.
And Tolly was this big Italian guy who was just, it was like a different world for me. I was from a small town and I'd come to Kansas City with my friend Michael to visit his Aunt Josephine and his family, and Tolly would be like, "Nephew, how are you?" And he's like, "I got you tickets." He was on the boxing commission. So he's like, "I got you tickets to the boxing match tonight, the municipal," and we're like, "Okay, great." And we're like setting up in the stands. He's like, "Nephew, come here. I got you better seats. Ringside," and we're like sitting ringside, and it's like a Tony Schiavone is like the big boxing guy of the day. And it's like nothing that I ever want to do. Like, I'm not into boxing.
We don't have this back home.
Well, no. And plus, if you're up around the ring, you're just getting splattered by blood and spit and all kinds of, it's not
sweat.
Yeah. It's not, and you kind of see the game of boxing and how, like, I'm sure there were certain people that were paid off to fall or what, you know what I mean? They had several bouts before they got to the main star of the night.
Yeah.
And it got better as it went on, but it was an experience,
Sure.
Uncle Tolly, he's no longer.
Those are your coming here to hang out with that buddy, or
coming here to hang out with him. And after college, he like left my college after our sophomore year. It's kind of weird because sometimes if you go to a 4-year college, some people after the second year vanish and leave, and then you go on with like half of your friends that you had before. And I had a lot of friends who were a couple years older than me too that graduated out too.
Sure.
And I was involved in the theater, and that's there's like so much work to do in theater and in a small college. And I was kind of a leader. And so I was doing all this work and just dedicating myself to that and taking way too many. I think my senior year in college, I was taking like 21 credits. It was crazy.
Come on.
Yeah. That's ridiculous, isn't it?
I signed up one trimester for 18. And I think halfway through the first week, I was like, this is a huge mistake. I got to drop at least.
It was a huge mistake. I was like bound and determined to get done in 4 years.
Sure.
And I should have done it differently.
Yeah.
But and when you're working in theater, it's like, you spend a lot of late nights there. Like I never watched primetime television most of my life because I grew up in a restaurant and I worked nights all the time, and then I was working in theater too. And when I moved to Kansas City, I kept working in theater and I was never home in the nighttime,
Right.
And I worked in a restaurant also in Kansas City. So I just was like, nights were always working.
Yeah.
And plus, if you do theater, if you choose theater as a career, you have to have like 2 or 3 other jobs because
it's not you're not
right
paying the bills and saving and taking vacations.
Right. It's like survival, on the edge of it all.
Yeah.
But I would have like 4 jobs,
right?
And that's just what we did.
So this is the first place that you visited, and it just from the beginning appealed to you.
After I had a really rough last year in college, and I kind of fell off my bearings a little bit. And I remember taking all my stuff. Basically, everything I owned was in my college dorm room. And so I moved everything into my dad's basement. And back in my
dorms all 4 years?
Yeah, I kind of I lived off campus the last year.
Oh, okay.
But my college had this floor there was this one dormitory that had the 3rd floor, and it was called an academic living community. And you had to have special permission to live up there. And they had solo rooms up there. And I somehow got into that situation my freshman year, which was kind of rare. And it was just this really interesting community of people, and they were mostly theater people and artists, and there were also like Fulbright scholar folk up there. There was a lot of drug use amongst the people that lived on this floor.
Sure.
Also, and I kind of was introduced to some of that to some extent, but I tried to keep it at bay for as much as I could, because my primary thing was the show must go on.
Yeah.
We have a show to do. And I did shows all the time.
Guys, we do the drugs after the show.
Right.
Not before.
Yeah,
Come on.
You can't do it, but there's no way. No way. Yeah, it was wild. There was so many wild experiences, because it was a small college that had a Greek system.
Oh, wow.
But they weren't nationally affiliated Greek. So they only had 2 letters. Like
funny.
They were like AOs or Phi Sig.
Yeah.
But they had this whole Hell Week, where they would put all their pledges through Hell Week,
hazing and whatnot.
Yeah, before they were finally made members, and it was right before spring break, and so everyone would go home on spring break, and then they would have this thing called 48 hours, where it was the final pledging with like the most heavy duty of their stuff they did to their pledges. But all the theater bohemian students that lived on this 3rd floor, they all would hang out, not go. Most of them wouldn't go home anyway. They'd stay on campus all the time. But they stayed on the 48 hours, and they would all take acid or mushrooms and stay up for 48 hours and climb all the trees and spy on all these people. And there was like some cross-pollination of people involved in all of that. But it was this like sub culture of people that I kind of became friends with in college, that I'm still friends with all of those people.
Nice.
Too. There were some really amazing folk in that group that were in the theater, but that was I sort of got off track. I don't know how that happened, but that experience was kind of formed a lot of who I am in a lot of ways. And I'm kind of in the generation, I like to call myself an elder statesman of Generation X.
Okay.
Some people would debate that, but there's some of us that are born in a certain period of time that will have to fight for because I don't feel like a baby boomer, and I'm raised by baby boomers, but we're kind of like in a lost generation that hasn't really truly ever been identified.
Yeah.
And so when I was in college, all of my friends were a year older than me. We're all into Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and the Who, and the Stones, and everybody a year younger than me were into Depeche Mode.
Oh wow!
And all this new wave music, Susie and the Banshees, I was
getting both,
and I'm in the middle, and I respect both sides, but the new wave part of the music sort of was coming out music for me,
okay,
because it was playing more with androgyny and more with liberation themes, and just a whole different way of of all of it happening, and like the introduction of David Bowie into my musical mindset and all of that kind of thing. So I kind of played both. I liked both of those worlds, like being on I've always kind of felt like I was in the middle of that kind of thing. And there's good music on both sides, what I mean?
Yeah. That makes me, if not that this was a thing that was present for me, but just even the most neutral calling of attention to this idea that Freddie Mercury might be gay,
right,
has like it's like malice adjacent. It's not. It's look at you know what that
right.
you know, and it's like I'm not really sure how that feels for you to be. I'm gonna put a pin in that. It feels weird, and I can't really. And then you pivot over here, and it's like Robert Smith and the Cure and the Depeche Mode. It's like no, hey guy, what do you think about that?
Right.
Like if you want to call that out, then what could you possibly say?
Exactly. And I think for young queer kids, we don't always have the language and the cognitive abilities to understand it all. It's more of a gut feeling.
Yeah.
It's more of like, why am I attracted to this? You know, it's that kind of a thing. What is this? You know, and Freddie Mercury played with that flamboyance.
Yep.
You know, he wasn't really afraid to do that.
No.
And I think like Elton John kind of came out as bisexual and then took it back and got married to a woman.
And then I think that I feel like I remember there was like some kind of effort or energy into Liberace, like it not being.
Liberace took someone to court and won. He took them to court for libel, for libelous. You know, saying he was gay, and he won the case.
And he was gay the whole time.
And he's so gay. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw the film Behind the Candelabra.
No,
I didn't. Matt
Damon
Damon is so good in that movie,
Okay,
and it's written from. He plays a real life person named Scott Thorson, who was one of Liberace's lovers.
Sure.
And I mean, this kid, like when he was 22, had a facelift to look more like Liberace.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
what is going on here?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, who at 22 has a fit? But I mean, and he wrote a book called Behind the Candelabra, and there's like a scene where he's like, I don't know how to deal with Lee's obsession with porn, and at 22 I feel like I'm now too old for him, and I'm just gonna have to go into the other room and have some more cocaine. I mean, that's like a paragraph from the autobiography. And it's just so sad, but like, yeah, Liberace was so gay, but we didn't it was like erased. You know what I mean?
And then so strange to, you know, the things that happened in Liberace's life, and then Freddie Mercury, and they've both been gone and Elton he's experienced the whole, you know, from what
he got lucky. Yeah, he
right.
did.
And so even now, though, today there's probably a little bit of his psyche that's like, are you sure it's okay for me to speak the truth about myself? Like, just to see all of that.
Yeah.
Not that over here it's now perfect and everything's fine, but what a swing, right?
No, yeah, he's overcome a lot because he's overcome alcoholism and all kinds of demons, and he's a big diva. You know what I mean? He's like he has his own. I mean, he has limitless funding. You know, he's made it big. You know, it's. Liberace.
Yeah, we're looking for a sponsor, Elton, if you know what I'm saying.
Exactly. Liberace died of AIDS, but his publicist was telling everyone that he was on a watermelon diet.
Watermelon?
Yeah, he's on a watermelon diet. Like, why is he losing all this weight? What's wrong with him? And Liberace's on a watermelon diet. I mean, he denied it up until the very end. He just had this show business mentality.
Right.
Of like,
eventually somebody's like, we got like 500 people in line that say they've at least made out with him.
Yeah, well, and he employed all these people. He had a road show that he did for years, and he had all these people working for him, and he felt responsible to all of them to keep the show going. And I mean, he was touring and doing these huge shows with, you know, a giant, Rolls Royce rolling on stage that. His
and
lovers,
the outfits,
and all the outfits, and all of the
jewelry,
the opulence of it. Yeah, and people loved it. Like all these people, you know, loved it, and it's crazy. I used to do a radio show for Gay Pride. I haven't done it for a number of years, but I did it for a long time, and I called the show "That's So Gay."
G-A-Y?
Yeah, that's so gay, you know, because that was like, that's so gay, you know, and I was kind of taking back part of the power of things as taking back words and making them our own again. Like queer, for example, is one of those words has been brought back, and now it represents all gay people.
Yeah.
LGBTQIA, you can just say queer and it covers all of it. But I would play Liberace he played it on piano, and then he would say, to dream the impossible dream. He was doing that song, and I would play that song on the radio, and I'd play Charles Nelson Riley and Paul Lynde, all this music that's just so gay, you know, but nobody talked about it. It was not, your aunts and your uncles all listened to it as part of their easy listening music.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was not identified that way. And as a queer kid, when you're trying to figure it all out and no one's there to explain it to you, like a lot of kids having a conversation with their mom and dad about, okay, if you go on a date, remember this and that. But a queer kid doesn't have that option. So you have to learn it all the hard way. Yeah. And you're trying to take social cues from all these different places.
Yeah, our parenting book doesn't have that chapter.
No, and it basically what happens is you develop another sense. It's another way of navigating. And it's an extra sensitivity that you have to be able to read people and understand. Are
they going to be cool?
Right.
If I'm honest.
Am I going to get killed? Am I going to get beat up? Is this going to be safe for me to be? And it's changed so much. I mean, we've come so far. I mean, really, literally. Yeah. But
do you ever watch Louis C.K.'s show on FX?
I haven't ever seen his show.
Okay.
But I heard it was amazing. And I was a really big fan of Better Things, the show that Pamela Adlund.
Oh, yeah.
Did and he produced the first couple seasons.
I made it a good way through season 1, and
it's a really brilliant.
She's amazing.
Show. Yeah, she's amazing.
And lifelong stand-up fan. He's been my favorite for a number of years now, and that it's changed as I've gotten older and so forth. But that show is very, very, very amazing because you get a lens of single parent and girl dad and dating and trying to be a comic and then he'll fold a few minutes of a bit from that's recorded live on stage in a spot. And then sometimes there's scenes with he's just hanging out with other comics and they're actual other professional comics, and there's a really, really incredible scene of one of those scenarios, and it's black and white, and they're all sitting around a poker table, but it's in somebody's basement or garage, and it's just a bunch of comics, and they're all I think drinking and smoking cigarettes and rolling dice or whatever they're doing, and one of them's gay, and he says something along the lines of "that's so gay," or he might even say that's kind of faggy or something like that. And he gives this very much take the power back, calm, passionate speech to explain the different forms of power that word has had for him his whole life. And they're all, and when the scene opens, they're all, everything everybody says, everybody's just cackling, just, gut busting, sore cheek laughing. And he finishes that and they're all like, fuck. and then he throws in a dig and it returns to them all laughing. But it is very much, I think, speaks to that take the power back thing.
Yeah, right.
And it for me, it was the weirdest thing to have, that's so gay, or don't be gay, don't be gay, be a thing, you just learned it, and then it's a thing that you say, and then later when you have a real understanding of what gay means, that's not that. It's not, it was never don't be that. It was don't be a tool, or don't be a but it carries connotations that you may not anyway. I'm not trying to soapbox it up.
No, that's okay. That's okay. No, people don't really say that as much as they used to, and that was an evolution from something that was much harsher before it.
Yep.
So
Yeah, he's wild. He talks about in one of his more recent specials. It's like, we're going to talk about the word retarded for 20 minutes.
Uh-huh.
And everybody's like, oh, and he's like, it's going to be fine. I promise you. But he's like, this is a thing that, I mean, they used to be on in movies and on television shows. And there was a lady that would ring the bell at the mall in Boston at Christmas, help the retarded. And now we're not allowed to say.
Right. On 39th Street, there used to be the Center for Retardation, a big sign right there. And it was, that's what it was called. And you didn't know what else to call it because that's what they called it. So
wow,
it's not there anymore. But
no. So hanging with Mark Manning, Wednesday Midday Medley, KKFI 90.1 FM, which you can access online at kkfi.org /listen/.
Yeah, if you go to kkfi.org, all the ways to connect are there. And we have an archives where you can listen to any of our shows after they're live if you missed it. And they're all held on to for a week, or for 2 weeks. They're held on for 2 weeks. So there'll be 2 episodes of every show there. If you
and
missed
after
that, they go off of that. We do have a logger that saves all of our programming at our station. But there's this crazy thing called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1996, which prohibits digital streaming from playing more than 4 songs by one artist in a 3-hour period of time, and only 3 from the same album. And there's all these different things. The record label made this deal with the government in 1996 to pass this stupid law. And it was during the time of Napster, and they were just freaking out that if it's going to be digital, who's going to buy it anymore? They just tape it off the radio, you know. Most kids I know taped off the radio all the time on cassettes. You know, we'd made our own stuff. I did that like crazy off the TV too, and it's just wild, and it's real out of date. But it makes it hard sometimes to do stuff. And so in terms of like streaming, we can't have those on our website indefinitely. They only allow them to be on there for 2 weeks.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, so it's like the royalty rights of music and the record labels trying, and not even like hardly any of those record labels even exist as we knew them. You know, it's all kind of, there's like 3 record labels. You know what I mean? It's a different world.
I mean, just trying to plug in, you know, little intros and whatnot of just audio, like. Probably greater than 50% of mine have been copyright flagged by YouTube, and it's like, it's not a strike against you, but if this is ever monetizable, it's not for you anymore. And I just through trial and error, I learned that if I keep each clip under 9 seconds, and if I happen to have 2 of them next to each other, I got to have a little 4-second buffer in there, and that seems to get me free and clear. However, there are, I mean, some artists who I think willingly say, no, don't put any of that. Like, if people can just do whatever they want. Because I've taken a few chances once I figure this out, and it's like, okay, this artist I really like a lot, and all 13-second clip, 7, nothing. And I'm like, so you can choose? You know, like as the artist, you could say, mess with everybody that does this with my stuff, or just let them.
Right.
That's the way it feels.
Yeah, no, there are some artists, like I know, like for example, Iris, I do this tribute show to her every year. So I'm like, I need to be able to play more than 4 songs in your birthday show. And she's like, Mark, I'll sign whatever you want, you know, because she owns the rights to all of her music. And at this point, she's gotten her music back from her original contract with Warner Brothers. Her first 3 albums were on Warner Brothers. But yeah, she doesn't care. And her and Greg both, in live concerts, would encourage their audience to tape record their shows and stuff. They didn't care, you know.
Well, the medley themes and special events features new releases, local artists, huge variety of genres, live stuff, performers and writers, and 23 years you've been?
It'll be 20 years in May.
But you've been at the station.
I started volunteering at the station in 2001.
Okay. So right in
so
there.
we're coming up on 25 years. But yeah, community radio. People don't always. We're like the native flower of broadcasting. We can grow in a little crack in the middle of a highway where there's no no water.
Yeah.
It's like survived all of these years. Through all these volunteer. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah,
It's
it
just
is.
really crazy.
Very cool.
But on the other hand, we were the first people to ever play Iris DeMent.
Yeah.
We're the first people to ever play Kelvin or Cinia
Right.
or Madison Ward of the Mama Bear. So many artists, because it's all the different programmers that are there have their own relationships with the artists, and it's its own special little thing.
Right.
You know.
Well, I really appreciate you sending me your list, and it was a wild one for me. And just in terms of, I've got 31 flavors of nerd inside me too, and so
Right.
So if we roll through it in chronological order of release, we actually start with a pair from 1971, and the first is Joni Mitchell's Blue. And the nerd portion of this is that I just like 3 weeks-ish ago had Joni Mitchell appear on somebody's list for the first time, and it was the one before this, the Ladies of the Canyon, I believe.
Yeah. Right.
But this one is 4th of 20 for her, 10 tracks, 36 minutes. This is, and I knew this before getting ready for the episode that had the other Joni Mitchell record on. I know this record's name, and it's because it's like hugely considered one of the greatest albums of all time.
Yeah,
and
it is.
None of it was familiar to me.
Uh-huh.
This was the first listen for me for this record, and I was like expecting there to be a couple bars of at least one track where I go, oh, nothing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, like, what is it? Well, first of all, what's your introduction story to her?
Well, I've known of her for a long time. I lived in a house on 61st and Holmes, and we had a lot of different roommates that came through. And it was right when people started listening to CDs.
Okay.
And my roommate at the time was an actress from Detroit who was living in Kansas City. And she got her dad bought her a CD player, and then she just got like 20 CDs. And one of them was Joni Mitchell's Blue. And I'd heard different Joni Mitchell records on vinyl, but they were kind of scratchy. And when I put this on, something about the quality of hearing music on a CD for the first time and the lyrics, and you feel like she's singing directly to you.
Yeah.
And when she got signed her record label, she'd already been a working musician for a long time, and David Crosby helped get her signed.
Oh yeah.
And she basically had 5 albums of music already written at that point.
Huh.
She had her first 5 albums all written.
Wow.
By that time that she got signed. And so she's put these albums out, boom, boom, boom.
If you, whatever year her debut was, I mean, she goes like 8 years in a row with an album a year. I was like, gosh.
Yeah, because she had all that material pretty much ready. This particular album is kind of like her most autobiographical.
Oh.
There are songs about a child she gave up for adoption. There's songs about, like, I think she might have dated everybody in Crosby, Stills.
I was going to say Graham Nash for sure, right?
Graham Nash for sure, because
Yeah.
Our House was about them being together. But she had relationships with Graham Nash and other members of the band. So if you're going through any kind of a breakup with somebody or a change in your life and you listen to this record, you feel like she's singing directly to you, especially on headphones and on CD. It's so personal. And it was a hard album for her to do live too, because it was so personal to her. And all the songs they're just incredible. And she does them either on piano or guitar. So there's like Blue is kind of a piano-based song. A Case of You is also one of these songs that's just like kind of a powerhouse of a song. There's just all these songs that like made me cry when I really was listening to this record for the first time, and I was like, I can't believe what I'm hearing. And it led to me like exploring her entire catalog.
Okay.
Because Ladies of the Canyon is also right up there with
Yep.
like one of the best albums of her whole thing, and she recently performed for the very first time on the Grammys at 80.
Like the other
Just
day?
the other day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And she suffered from polio as a child.
Yeah.
So she had to relearn how to walk and talk after going through this horrible. She was in like a body thing where they put you in a steel cage basically, and she lived through that and survived, and then had this whole career. And then a number of years ago she had an aneurysm, and we almost lost her. She was almost gone, and she had to relearn how to walk and talk again. And a bunch of her friends started going over to her house and doing these Joni jams and just playing music with her in her living room. And it just developed over a period of time that they ended up, Brandy Carlisle organized this thing at Newport Jazz Festival about 2 years ago. And Joni shows up unannounced, and they do a Joni jam live on stage.
No way.
With all of these amazing different musicians filling in the gaps. And go to YouTube and just put in Joni at Newport, and she plays guitar. I just cried when I started playing guitar because it's like she had to relearn how to do all of that
again.
And she sang Both Sides Now, which was one of her classic songs. Other people have made it a hit.
Oh, okay.
She's not always had a lot of hit songs per se. Like David Geffen. She helped start David Geffen. He was
Records.
Wow. Geffen Records. He's now a billionaire. He just played his cards right. And sometimes he would either sell the record label for stocks or for money, and sometimes the stocks turned out to be billions of dollars. You know what I mean? Later, so he's like really made it big from coming from the mailroom of the William Morris Agency. That's where he started, in the mailroom.
Wow, yeah.
And he like would read people's mail and figure out who was in charge. And he like lied about his resume to get the job. So they went to check his sources. So he was in the mailroom, so he was able to intercept the people writing the letter saying, no, he didn't go to school here. He was able to like destroy that evidence, but he was her first agent, and he's like, would you write a hit song, Joni, please? And he had represented Laura Nairobi for her, so he had already been in the business, but they had a whole relationship and early in her career. But this album, will always be one of my most favorite records. It's sort of like a talisman. It's sort of like a special sacred recording, in so many ways. And it just has meant a lot to me and my circle of friends. Cool. Also. And it's 1971. She's in the recording studio, and down the hall is Carole King doing Tapestry.
Oh, really?
At the same time, and Carole King is like, can we use your piano? It sounds better, please. And James Taylor is there, and all these people are like collaborating, and it's just this different world of music. The like early Electra Asylum people, that period, all these California rockers that are
sure.
Like Mama Cass is like in that mix of people.
Fascinating.
All these kind of cool people. And Joni's like this Canadian, fair-haired. I mean, the song Woodstock, she wrote for Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. They made a hit out of it, but her version is so different,
I bet,
than theirs. And her version is the magical version. It's like, if you listen to it, it's like there's some sort of superpower involved with it, and it's just her voice and the piano, basically. And she just never. People would get mad at her because she wouldn't sing her hit songs when she toured, and she's like, nobody ever asked Picasso to paint the same painting over and over,
right?
She thought of herself more as a painter than a musician later in life. And really, she almost gave up on folk and went into jazz. She, like midway in her music, you can hear her changing after this record, especially.
Okay.
After the first 5 records, she's like trying new stuff all the time, and like she tuned her guitar in a way that nobody else did.
Oh, really?
It would be really hard to recreate her music because you'd have to retune your guitar to make it sound like hers. And I saw her live at the United Center in Chicago, and she was on tour with Dylan. and it was like 1998. I had a broken leg, and a friend of mine in Chicago, I was like, go to a Ticketmaster and get tickets, and I'll pay you, and we'll go, and I'll fly up there and see it. And I don't know what he did, but we got front row center tickets to see her. And Chris Bowie was on trumpet, and Larry Klein, kind of a famous producer, bass player, and it was her husband at one time, he was on bass, and then she had a pedal steel guitar player, and then her guitar, and she had a stand with she was a chronic, she smoked a lot in her life, and she had a cigarette going the whole concert that had a smoke that at the United Center, the ceiling's way up there. So, and she had this amazing set of songs, and I was in the front row, and I felt like she was singing right to me, and I just cried.
Oh my!
I cried the whole concert. I was like a wet mess, but yeah, that was special.
Have you ever dabbled in any musicianship yourself? Or?
I played the trumpet,
okay,
and like from 5th grade into high school, and it's kind of funny because at KKFI we have a whole group of jazz programmers that come on in the afternoon. And the guy that follows me is Jeff Harshbarger.
Okay.
And I had a friend in from Nebraska, and I was like, Jeff, meet my friend Les. He's from Nebraska. And Jeff's like, I was born in Nebraska. And I go, you were? I didn't know that. Where were you born? He goes, York, Nebraska. And I was like, York, that's my hometown. Wait, your dad was Mr. Harshbarger. His dad was the band director who taught me how to play trumpet when I was in 5th grade. It's just kind of a small world sometimes.
Yeah.
And they would like go out and train little kids to play instruments. So by the time they got to high school, they'd be ready for the band.
Now, once you made that connection, did that's a unique last name. Did you
Harshbarger?
Yeah.
No, yeah. The minute he said he was from York, Nebraska, it clicked. Like the time frame of it all. Mr. Harshbarger, because Mr. Harshbarger was kind of famous because he took our high school band to the Orange Bowl parade.
Oh wow!
You know, and yeah, that was kind of a big deal. And he left York and went to where they grew up in Manhattan, Kansas, or someplace like that in Kansas.
Sure.
And his dad always played in a jazz combo through his whole life. And if his dad couldn't do the gig, he'd send Jeff, who would be like 12 or something. Jeff, you go play it. And he'd go to this bar and play, with all these jazz cats. And I don't know if you know Jeff Harshbarger. You should have him on this show.
Does he live here?
Yeah, he lives here.
Yeah. He comes on after you.
He's an amazing professional bass player who plays with everybody.
Sure.
And he plays with him and Steve Tulipana have a band called Men of Men.
Yeah. And
they do a lot of covers, but they're like amazing. It's so much fun to see them live. It's a spectacle.
Well, I have the Shiner shirt because Jason Gherkin came and did an episode. And then my only second time for a Joni record, the first being just a couple of weeks ago, and then staying in 1971, Hunky Dory, David Bowie.
Right.
This is only the second time that a Bowie record has made anybody's list.
Wow.
The first time was not too long ago when Steve Tulipana had Hunky Dory on his list.
Did Steve tell you his Hunky Dory story?
He might have, but
okay.
If you know it, I would love to hear it again.
Well, this year for the Bowie thing on Thursday night, they did Hunky Dory from beginning to end.
Okay.
The band learned the whole album. They had already done a few of the songs before, like Changes had been done before, but they did all of these songs, and apparently Steve's mom was from the West Coast, and every year they would drive out to see her family, and on the drive they would play Hunky Dory.
Okay, he might have.
And it was his mom's favorite Bowie album too, and she recently passed.
Yes.
And he told that story.
And they were close.
I
got this feeling.
Yeah, Steve's a real family guy in a way, and also from the restaurant world too.
Yes.
But yeah, this record, when I first got a hold of it, I couldn't quit it. I even choreographed a dance piece to one of the songs from my college.
Which one?
This song Kooks.
Okay.
the song about he wrote for his son basically when he was married to Angela Bowie and they had a child together, and Duncan, his son is now named Duncan.
Okay.
He's a filmmaker. He made the movie Moon. I don't know if you saw that movie with Sam Rockwell, but he was his name was Zoe when he was first born.
Okay.
Tony Visconti,
Zoe Bowie,
Mark Boland, and David Bowie and Tony Visconti were all in the same circle of friends in the UK. And Tony Visconti produced or worked on The Man Who Fell to Earth with Bowie.
Okay.
And then he kind of left Bowie for a while and went just exclusively playing with Mark Boland. But Mark Boland had a kid named Roland Boland. Tony Visconti had a son named Monty Visconti. And David Bowie had Zoe Bowie.
No way.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah, they were all like doing a few drugs and having fun.
Yeah.
But no, this record, and it's such a beautiful. There's so many great. Like there's a song called Andy Warhol, and he had Bowie, the man who sold the world. It did better in sales in the United States than in the UK. So the label brought him over not to tour musically, but just to do radio stations and to promote his music just by going and doing interviews with people. And he used that trip to go to the factory and meet Andy Warhol. He was a huge fan of Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground. And so he met Warhol at the factory, and he goes, "I wrote a song about you, and I want to play it for you now." And Warhol's like, "Okay, whatever." And he sang Andy Warhol to Andy Warhol, and he got done, and Andy Warhol was like, "I like your shoes."
Oh, wow.
Okay, bye. And then he said later he hated the song. I hate that song, but it's a great song. But Warhol was producing a show called Pork in New York, and it had a bunch of different actors that some ended up working for Bowie.
Okay.
In his production company. But Angela and Bowie saw these costumes and these flamboyant factory folk, and that influenced the look of Ziggy Stardust.
Oh.
And they went back to the UK and got Mick Ronson and put eyeshadow. Get over here, bloke. We're gonna put some. Yeah. You're gonna wear these.
Hold still.
You're gonna wear these tight pants from now on, and it just the band had to do this glam rock look that they kind of created, but it was inspired a lot by the factory. And Warhol was friends with this guy named Ken Pitt, who was one of Bowie's early managers in like the late 60s. And Ken Pitt was friends with Warhol, and on a trip to New York, Warhol said, "Well, I have this band I'm producing. They're called the Velvet Underground, and here's an acetate copy of our first record." And he gave him this acetate copy, and it was like a year before the record even came out. And Ken Pitt took that record back and gave it to Bowie, and Bowie learned all the songs.
Oh, wow.
And he was playing those songs in his live sets with his own band.
This would be their self-titled?
Yeah. He was playing them live in England before they were even released here. So that's how much of a fan he was of Lou Reed. The song Queen Bitch is about Lou Reed. And Velvet Underground and Nico came out in 1967 or 68.
I was going to,
It came out the same year as Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And everybody bought Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Nobody bought the Velvet Underground and Nico.
I thought they had self-titled, and Velvet Underground and Nico was number 2.
That was the first.
It was the first.
That was the first.
Okay.
Because there might be like different.
That's the one with the banana.
Yeah.
Okay.
With the banana. Warhol did the cover, and Warhol insisted that Nico be in the band.
Okay.
She wasn't in the band, but he was part of his world and he made her be in the band.
Okay.
So she couldn't really sing. She was a model. And she had a voice like the, and but she ended up having a career in music. Like John Cale later produced.
Was their second record self-titled then?
Then she wasn't involved after that first record.
And then it's like a white heat and loaded.
Right. And by that time, Lou Reed wasn't even really in the band. Like towards the last album, he wasn't really involved. John Cale was only in the first 2 Velvet Undergrounds. He left. Him and Lou always had kind of a friction between the two of them. But Bowie ended up producing, Lou Reed's like second solo record, that Walk on the Wild Side, and really helped make Lou Reed into this pop star that he really wasn't before. They had just an interesting friendship over all these years, and
I had no idea.
So David Bowie for me led me into all of these other worlds that I like, the tree of music, all the different branches. So I really, through all of these songs, had to learn about all of these people, and I became a huge Velvet Underground fan.
Okay.
I just, there's no other way. And the Velvet, if you listen to the Velvet Underground's 4 albums that they have, there was a CD compilation, a 5 CD set that was released about 25 years ago. And that for a long time was like the soundtrack of our house where we live. My partner would play that record over those CDs over and over and over. Just so many good songs. And
you can say record.
They were just a different band that were, and John Cale. I became a huge fan of John Cale's solo work and have been able to see him live 2 or 3 times.
Oh, cool.
Sterling Morrison, who's no longer with us, was just an amazing guitarist, and their drummer was unique. She didn't, like a lot of drummers, she didn't really know how to play drums, but it's what made her sound unique. It's like she played the bass, she set the bass up like parallel to the floor and banged on it like that, kind of like almost like a timpani drum, you know.
Fascinating.
But yeah, their whole story is really fascinating.
This one was 4th of 26, which is a huge library, you know. No disrespect to Joni, she had 20 as well, but 11 tracks, 42 minutes. It sounds like you know his library pretty well.
Pretty well, okay. Yeah. Because what happened was you you hear something and then you're like, oh my God, I need to hear more, and you start scratching the surface, and then it's all so different. He kept reinventing himself, and he got a piano for his apartment in London, and he wrote all the music for Hunky Dory and Ziggy Stardust at the same time.
Wow.
And also all the young dudes for Mott the Hoople.
Okay.
And he's like 24, 25 years old, and he wrote all these songs. You know, it's like, and then he just continued to reinvent himself. And if you follow his career and all the different discography, there's like a different sound with every album. And then there's like one song on that album that's different than all the other songs that leads you to the next album. Okay. That sounds like that.
It's like the cliffhanger.
Right. It's almost like that. You know, there's there's a song that leads you to the Diamond Dogs period. And that was when he wanted to make rock and roll like a Broadway touring show. He was one of the first people to like try to do a Broadway show as a rock concert and have this huge set and all these dancers.
Man, Christoph Nemeth.
Yes. Great, amazing guitarist.
Yes, he was here in September, and I bet
that was interesting.
It was, you know, some people just like sort of get this mix of good conversation and like the right amount of energy, and it just winds up being fantastic. And he, you know, I very much enjoying this in that same way, and his was equal, but his list had 5 records, and it was like this. I think they were all within the same 3 or 4 window year, just all early 80s, just poppiest of the pop.
Yeah.
So I think it was in his episode, and I don't remember how we got there, but at some point I was like, well, how does one who has these interests and grows up in this fashion wind up in this spot? And he was like, man, you know, none of any of this happens without Bowie. And I was like, he's so right. He's so right.
Right.
And it's like that has come up, you know, in 4 or 5 episodes since.
Yeah. And I will add to that, Bowie, the Stones, the Beatles, they don't happen without Little Richard.
Oh.
It's Little Richard who knocked the door down on really how to be a rock and roll star.
Okay.
Elvis is not the king of rock. No way.
Right.
He's not even close. Little Richard is the king of rock. He went out there, and if you look at early Little Richard, you feel like you're watching Prince.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
You feel like you're watching, and he went on the road with the Stones, and he taught Mick Jagger how to be a lead singer of a band.
Wow.
I mean, Mick Jagger pre Little Richard tour, post Little Richard tour, whole different thing.
Okay.
The
that
Mick,
must have been like late 60s.
Yeah, the Mick Jagger that we know of and love, and these guys from England, the whole thing was happening all the time with Led Zeppelin. They were giving us back our music and saying, you all don't appreciate these black artists who invented rock and roll, because it was the black artists who invented rock and roll. You guys don't. We love them. They made us who we are. And like David Bowie, Let's Dance. He went to Nile Rodgers and said, "I want to make a Little Richard album. That's what I want. That's what I want."
What?
Yeah, I mean, Nile Rodgers produced it for him.
Okay.
Let's Dance was produced by Nile Rodgers, and Bowie's like playing this. I guess they were like on an island where they're recording or something, and he had this 12-string guitar with like 5 strings on it, and he was playing what became Let's Dance.
The riff?
Right. Well, I think Nile actually came up with the riff. Because Nile Rodgers is also one of these unsung heroes of music who Chic, the band Chic, Le Freak, they changed music forever. And really, like, hip-hop owes so much. Like the very first hip-hop songs totally ripped off Chic. They just played Chic and rapped over them. You know what I mean? They were like, Good Times.
Yeah.
These, all those songs are so universal, and they sound just as good today. But then he went on to produce everybody's hit comeback record. He produced, you just go down the road and B-52's Love Shack and Let's Dance, and it just goes on and on and on and on.
Have you ever seen a movie called Mystery Alaska?
No.
It's what's his name? Russell Gladiator.
Russell Crowe?
Russell Crowe.
Okay.
He's kind of the star of it. It's a tiny little town in Alaska, and the whole town revolves around a Saturday outdoor hockey game. And there's a very finite number of positions on this team, and there's a town council that decides who's on the team, and if you make the team, it's a really big deal. And if you get, if you're on the team and your spot gets taken by somebody else, it's super sad. And so Hank Azaria plays the character that grew up there but then moved away and became famous, and he comes back and doesn't regret leaving because he's found fame and fortune, but also wants to be revered like a local. So he has this brilliant idea to fly in the New York Rangers, the NHL team, to play this. And so that's the premise of the movie, and the person that they bring in to sing the national anthem is Little Richard.
Oh my God.
And so when he has a trailer, and it's Little, and he's very, very Prince-like. Purple and capes, and somebody goes up to him, and I don't know if they're a fan and they have curiosity, or if they're just checking on him to see if he needs anything, and they're expecting like this big profound thing, and he just goes, "I'm cold." That's like all he says. That's so perfect.
That's great.
So not exactly the same, but in that same way that I horribly summarized, there are gay people and AIDS and Freddie Mercury, and then he's dead. Bowie was mysterious to me in that way as well. Like, I knew a tune or two of his, but it wasn't like the Beatles or Diana Ross or John Denver, or somebody that you can just, I know what that person looks like, and they live with a wood burning stove and a cabin at the end of the road. Right. And then I saw a picture of him for the first time, and I was like, or maybe what was the Pan's Labyrinth? Just Labyrinth. Labyrinth.
His collaboration with the Muppets, basically.
Yes. Yeah, and it's like
Jim Henson Productions.
Every time I happen to get a glimpse at him or into his world, it's like it just makes it more like what?
Yeah,
and
he
played
it was
around. Way years later until I was like, he was a ginormous pioneer, perhaps unintentionally, of a billion different wrinkles in music. And it's like, I wish I could have known that all these years where I was, trying to. It's a wild phenomenon to me.
No, he definitely played with this idea of being the other, the other thing, the outsider, and for like I keep using the term queer kid from Nebraska or whatever, but for thus people like me who are like, do we fit in or whatever? He was sort of this crack in the sky, like his song. He was sort of this way of out, like, oh my God, look at him. His music dealt with these things that I felt like estrangement. He actually writes songs about estrangement and about all these different things, and you had a feeling of acceptance through his music that you didn't have before. And I know when Let's Dance did come out, I had already been a Bowie freak for quite a while, and then Let's Dance came out, and all of a sudden everybody loves Bowie. That was such a universal.
How could you not?
Right, that was such a universal, and I was like, no, he's mine. Bowie's mine.
Right?
And then it didn't take but a couple of years that everyone all of a sudden didn't care anymore about Bowie. He put out a couple albums after that didn't do as good, and the record label dropped him, and he had to reinvent himself again. And he just did that over and over. He found a way to keep things interesting for himself, and he does owe a lot to some of the most incredible guitarists that we've ever had of the last 50 years. He got to play with some of the very best guitarists who didn't always get credit, because this album is Mick Ronson who did a lot of work on this record too, like arranged a lot of the strings and a lot of the music and made it happen. And so many of his albums, the guitarists are so important to what he did, but he knew how to put together the best, and Robert Fripp, and there's a whole story about him. I think it's Robert Fripp. He's stealing Robert Fripp from Frank Zappa. Does that make sense?
I associate Robert Fripp with King Crimson.
Or is it Adrian Belew? I'm getting mixed up here.
Yeah.
Frank Zappa had a guitarist who could have been Robert Fripp, and I'm sorry if I get this wrong. But he stole him, Frank Zappa.
Okay.
And then he's like, we have to go out to dinner and talk about this. And so they went to this restaurant, and sure enough, Frank Zappa's eating in that restaurant. And he's like, how are you, Captain Tom? He like demoted him from Major Tom. He's like, but yeah, Bowie, he managed to find really good people to help him accomplish. But he also did like later in life, he did the Berlin trilogy, and he's like 30 years old at that point, and did Low and Heroes, and also 2 Iggy Pop records that one of them he practically wrote the whole record, and he toured with Iggy Pop on both those. And I know when they did their second record together, Iggy Pop's like, I better get busy in writing. He's going to take over. He's going to get all the royalty, Right. But did all this great music, and those are great period. That's a great period of his musical life to look into also. Bowie, Christoph is right. Bowie is a lot. He it's like the whole thing about the Velvet Underground and Nico, that record. No one bought it, but everyone who did buy it started a band. Everyone who did buy that record started their own band.
Okay.
Yeah. So it had that record is so influential to so many people. Who was like, I didn't know you could write a song about heroin. I didn't know you could, and it's such a beautiful song. It's almost like a Bruce Springsteen song in a way,
Yeah.
But they changed so much about music, and really, really amazing. Just putting those different sounds together.
Yeah. Well, we take a quick leap forward 1 year, 1972, with Moonshadow by LaBelle.
Oh my God! Wow.
Bunch of different iterations of this outfit, but as far as LaBelle specifically, second of 7, 9 tracks, 39 minutes. Just to get it out of the way, obviously the vocals are amazing.
Yeah, right.
But the guitar, drum, organs, piano, bass, horns, percussion. I mean, there's like a dozen plus. Phenomenal. Like when Gherkin was on, he just chose Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. I was like, well, that's really weird, because I'd never, I knew the hits very well. I didn't know the non-hits, and those are the true stars of that record. And I was like, what is happening right now? And he was like, well, I mean, you have one of the best rhythm sections in all of rock. Yeah, playing drums and bass, and you can do anything on top of that. And of course, it helps that it's Elton.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite Elton records of all time. Yeah, definitely.
Just, I mean, really no skips, and it's not a short record,
right? No, it's not.
Everything is just such a story too.
Yes.
Anyway, amazing vocals, amazing musicianship. What is your introduction story to LaBelle?
I worked at the Midland Theater for a while before it was Power and Lighted.
P&L'd?
Yeah, before it was P&L'd. And I had a friend that worked there before I worked there. And Patti LaBelle came through town once a year and did a show there.
Okay.
And my friend got us like front row tickets every time, And I had seen Patti LaBelle on TV. And I remember Live Aid. Like, Patti LaBelle kind of made a big impression during Live Aid because she like showed everybody what kind of powerhouse she was. But she'd been around a while, and she'd been through the whole Motown thing. And she was Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells.
Yes.
And one of the Bluebells was stolen by Berry Gordy and put into the Supremes after they had their mix up with that band. And Patti LaBelle and Gladys Knight both have kind of a thing about not really liking Diana Ross, because she was kind of the queen of Motown, and given all of this, and they were more of the singers. They got their leftovers and stuff like that. But Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells ended up kind of suffering later on in their incarnation. And this producer, this woman from England, took them on as a project and redefined them and gave them a whole new look and kind of put them into glam rock outfits on stage.
Interesting.
And then had them do rock and roll covers.
Pete Townsend.
Right. You Won't Get Fooled Again. I mean,
Cat Stevens.
Exactly. Right? And so many others. And
that Cat Stevens version is like creeping on 10 minutes.
It's amazing. And they also put together these incredible bands. And then the three of them together are three powerhouse women that can each stand on their own. Sarah Dash, George Harrison. She toured with George Harrison for several tours and years, and the British guys wanted these women with them all the time. They wanted to have these great women. And Nona Hendryx also did work with the Talking Heads and has put out many solo records and wrote so many of LaBelle songs.
Okay.
I mean, they did covers, but they also did a whole lot of original work that Nona wrote. And the three of them together had this. They'd known each other for so long, and they knew each other's personalities pretty well, and they kind of knew Patti was the front of the.
So Live Aid is what puts Patti on your radar initially.
For me, in a way, it was Live Aid, because I remember watching the whole Live Aid thing happening.
It's just like 86?
85.
85. Okay.
85. Okay. Yeah. And that was right when that was the day I moved all my stuff from college into my dad's house.
Oh, yeah.
And Live Aid was on, and I just watched all of it. I knew of Patti LaBelle a little bit before that.
But you got to backpedal a decade.
But I got to backpedal, and then I saw Patti live at the Midland like 6 times.
Okay.
And she did her same show pretty much every time, and she had all this. Like at one point, she would roll across the stage and roll back across the stage and then roll back and then kick her shoes into this air. And they'd go flying back, and then she'd crawl to the edge of the stage, singing too. Crawl to the stage and take her eyelashes off and give them to someone in the front row, And
they were doing fake eyelashes back then?
Well, in 1980, whatever year this is, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, fake eyelashes always, yeah, And she just had all the shtick that she did, but she also did a damn good show that was like, and her shows at the Midland, the audience was like half black people dressed for church and half gay people dressed for the gay bar, and tons of cologne, just way too much perfume. And that was the crowd. That was the audience, and everyone's like together in harmony, in love with Patty, who's like giving this. No one else quite sings like her, you know what I mean? And she's like crying and emoting, and she's a very emotional, empathetic performer. And then I discovered LaBelle. I got an album called LaBelle Silver, which is kind of a greatest hits package. And then I was like, oh my God, this is so good. There's no bad LaBelle song. And then from there, I just went into all of their albums. And,
did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was like, I have to know about what album that came from and who these people are. And just a huge respect for not just Patty, but for Nona and also for Sarah, who's gone now. She passed, and they put out a reunion album, I don't know, like 20 years ago or 15 years ago, where they got back together.
So if you explored their whole discography, what was it about this one? Was it first?
This has my favorite song of theirs of all time.
Which is
I Believe I Finally Made It Home.
Okay.
And Nona wrote that song, but they all three sing on it.
That's late in the record,
yeah,
right?
it's like it's like the third track on the second side.
Okay.
And that's my favorite of all of their songs. It's a great album. I mean, there's really nothing wrong with any of it. And You Won't Get Fooled Again is a great way to start a record.
Yeah.
I mean, I played that song a lot on the radio during certain political times. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And Sunday's News, Nona wrote that song. There's so many good songs, but I Believe I Finally Made It Home is my favorite LaBelle song. So I had to choose this album because of that.
It was an absolute treat. I was like, what? I mean, because it's like I know Patti LaBelle, but why is it? Is this related to her at all? Like, what is this? And then it's throwing me off with the title. It's like and then I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic.
Yeah, the artists never get to name these things. It's like a record label that does it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm looking up something here.
Okay.
And to find out, the Wickham, the woman who like was their manager, who like helped reinvent LaBelle, taking them from Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells to just LaBelle. I was just gonna find out what her name was. But the last name is Wickham, but not that it's important that we have to have that, but yeah, Patti LaBelle. It's kind of like if you're a gay person of a certain age, Patti LaBelle's one of your,
spirit animals,
right? Exactly.
So I don't know.
I mean, her version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow is like who can do it better,
right?
And
right.
Sam Harris won a major talent contest by imitating Patti LaBelle doing it, basically. But yeah, it's pretty good. So you like the record?
I did. I liked it a lot.
No, and you're right. The studio, the band, it's incredible. And it's weird how things work out. But like when I first searched for them on YouTube, it was hard to find them.
Oh, really?
And then every year more stuff gets people.
It's like their population
right.
is
So
growing
if you go down a LaBelle, you can go down to LaBelle YouTube hole if you want to.
Sure.
And there's a whole bunch of new stuff that's been added.
Oh, wow.
From like 5 years ago.
Cool.
Of their bands, their performances with their bands, their live shows, and then there's other like Patti LaBelle stuff. Like there's a whole YouTube rabbit hole of Patti LaBelle Goes Off.
Oh boy.
Where you get to watch her going off on things.
Nice.
She's a pretty even-tempered person, but every once in a while she loses her patience with folk. But don't we all?
Well, so the two nerdy nuanced pieces for me with Joni Mitchell and then David Bowie, and then moving into LaBelle, I was like, I don't know who this is at all. So it's a complete first. And believe it or not, going from 1972 all the way to 1986, this is also the first time a Prince record has made anybody's list.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
I'm totally serious. 110 episodes in, and it's the first
Oh my God.
Prince record. Parade.
And it was hard for me to pick my favorite Prince.
Okay. I bet.
the early Prince is some of the groundbreaking stuff that changed my life,
Yeah.
like Controversy and
Yeah.
Dirty Mind.
Yeah.
I almost chose those two, but this record just doesn't stop being good.
Parade, 8 of 39. Talk about discographies. But perhaps only 3 of 3 with the Revolution getting billed as, or getting credited. Also the soundtrack to Under the Cherry Moon, 12 tracks, 40 minutes, by which he directed and starred in.
Yes. Right.
That he's sold 150 million plus records, is in 3 different Hall of Fames, has 7 Grammys. I mean, just like, we could probably talk for 40 minutes just about accolades and accomplishments.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you ever see Prince live? You ever
No.
I got to see him live like 3 times at Municipal and at Kemper Arena.
Okay.
And he didn't ever, it was always a show. It was amazing show. This record is emotional to me. It's there's like so much going on in this record, and Under the Cherry Moon is not a good movie. You know, it was Purple Rain like blew people away.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh my God, this movie. And he was trying to capitalize on making another movie. And it's not bad. It's just it's the storyline is weaker, and Jerome is in it, the butler, and there's different characters from the early movie that are in it too, but it's just different. But the soundtrack I thought was revolutionary. It has a whole different sound. All of a sudden coming out of nowhere, like Kiss alone. Like,
before I hit play, I was like, if this whole record sounds like Kiss, I'm in for a treat. And then I was like, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't at all.
No, it does. There's similarities here, and they're like Girls and Boys and Hole in Your Head.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of stuff going on with acoustic rhythm happening. It's not all like, it's all like there's some really amazing stuff going on. Sometimes It Snows in April is like this song that is sort of important to a group of my friends for all kinds of reasons. It's almost become a theme song mourning the loss of like people that we loved, and especially related to the whole era of AIDS and dying. And a friend of mine produced a play called The Normal Heart that we did at Unity Temple in the Plaza, and it was a non-equity production that involved equity actors in it, and we did it to raise money for the Good Samaritan Project, and we did like 8 shows. And Normal Heart was a play written by a man named Larry Kramer, who was a playwright who became an activist, and he created ACT Up. I don't know if you ever heard of ACT Up. ACT Up was a political organization that started in New York City, ended up having chapters around the world that still exist, and it was a political action group that was designed to get people to wake up because gay people were dying and nobody was doing anything about it, and the government wasn't doing anything about it, and the AMA wasn't doing anything about it, and so gay people organized and protested against all of these different establishments, and were like, people are dying, and they're literally people with AIDS who are dying, fighting for their lives. And Larry Kramer wrote a play called The Normal Heart, which kind of tells the story of the early years of the AIDS crisis, and it tells his story of meeting his it's fictional, but he meets this New York Times reporter, and they fall in love, and they get married, and then they get married in a hospital room right before his partner dies.
Jeez.
And I play the character that dies in the play.
Really?
So I'm in this play at Unity Temple. This is 1991, and a friend who's directing this play says, I want you to audition for this play. And I'm like, I'm scared of that, you know. And he's like, no, you have to audition for this play. And so I went and auditioned, and the lead actor, I just had this chemistry with them, and I ended up getting cast in this play, and we did it. And I had to figure out how to die on stage, you know? And I'm not that good of an actor. I'm like...
Even for all your years in theater?
Right, I'm not. And we were doing this at Unity Temple, and I had this moment in the play while we were doing it that I was able to we did it in the basement where they had a theater space. They recently took out the wall. The theater had been blocked off for a while. They knocked out the wall. But I went upstairs to where the sanctuary is of Unity Temple, and I sat kind of near where the pulpit kind of is, sort of, and there are 5 windows at the back of the building that face onto 47th Street. And I imagined 5 people that I knew who had passed from AIDS, because at that point in my life, I was already up to like over 20 people or more that were friends of mine that had died. And it was a period of time when we were just going to funerals all the time for our friends. And being in the theater and in the restaurant industry, it was both of those industries were hugely affected by AIDS. And you'd go to these funerals and people would just erase this person's artistic life or their gay life or the fact that they had a lover that they'd been with for 10 years.
Oh, in speaking about...
Yeah, in speaking about them. It would just be, the family would just take that part and remove it. And then you'd leave the funeral to Fred Phelps protesting outside.
No way.
Yeah, you'd literally leave Unity Temple and got to the steps and there'd be Fred Phelps saying, AIDS, fags burn in hell. That'd be the next thing you'd see. And it was just this horrible time in our history.
In
when
1991?
This is like
how would he know?
The late 80s, early... They just paid attention to all this. They would send out a fax saying, we're going to come and protest this.
But I mean, how do they know that person X or friend X or relative X that just passed was gay?
I don't
get that information.
I don't know exactly how they paid attention.
Crazy.
They watched the obituaries or whatever. They paid attention. They were in Topeka and they were just looking for attention, and it was cruel, incredibly cruel, and just this really horrible time in our life. And so I'm in this play and we're telling this story, and I'm visualizing people that I knew who passed from AIDS, and I'm literally saying, and I'm not a huge, I'm kind of an agnostic type person in a lot of ways, but I do carry around a crystal.
Oh, wow.
Legit. And so I had a crystal, and I'm like, okay, if there's ever a body of a building that is spiritual, this is it. This space right here.
This is my channeling.
So I'm like, okay, wherever you are, wherever you are, Kent, or wherever you are, Jamie, could you please help me out right now? I have to die on stage tonight and I need help. Could you please come and help me? And I was like, please. And I'm like, almost like praying to spirits. And then something would happen within me and I would start crying. And that was my problem. I couldn't cry. And I grew up hiding crying. I was one of those kids.
You couldn't cry for your part of it, as in the role of the play, or you physically couldn't?
The next scene that I had to do on stage was I had to start the scene crying, like I had been crying for hours, and I'm in my...
And in real life, you can't cry?
And in real life, I couldn't cry.
Because of all these years you spent hiding it?
Because I grew up in an environment where people like fag, queer, and my defense to that was to smile and pretend like it wasn't bothering me. That was how I in my own mind figured out how to combat that. I would be like, ha ha ha, and laugh it off, So I suppressed that. And I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, but it was just a natural reaction as like a 5th grader or a 6th grader.
People saying those things to you at that age?
Yeah, at that age. It started around 4th grade. And just because I looked queer, or I don't.
Really?
Yeah, I swear to God, I'm not kidding you. I grew up, everything was fine until about 4th, 5th grade, and at that point, I just remember walking down the street in my hometown. A car would drive by, and someone would yell "faggot," and that happened a lot on a regular basis. And you have to figure out how to deal with that in your own way. And for me, I would just smile and nod. That was sort of my defense mechanism.
Happened a lot for how long?
Until I left there. Yeah.
Like into late teens?
Into high school.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
Into high school. And I went to college. And then when I went to college, it was like a whole different world. I found a whole different group of friends, and it wasn't as big of a deal. And that's where I came out in college. When I was like 19, I came out. But like,
and if it's none of my business, feel free to tell me so, but mom, dad, sisters,
yeah,
supportive?
It was a process.
Sure.
It was a process because my mom and dad, parents blame themselves,
Like
and
they did something wrong?
right, they did something wrong, and my mom was first had a really hard time with it.
Okay.
And my mom was pretty open-minded about stuff, but she took it hard at first. And I'd had a girlfriend my freshman year in college too, and we had dated for about 9 months, and we had an intimate relationship. And for me, I think it was something I had to go through to find out for sure.
For sure.
Are you really gay? Because I
For real.
I really felt like I was gay from age 5 in my own mind,
Yeah.
and I knew I was attracted to the same sex in that way. But you just don't always know how to deal with it and place it. And as you get older, I remember I was a freshman in high school, and I was like, what does queer mean? People were calling me queer, so I had to look it up in the dictionary.
Yeah.
Like, what is queer?
It's another, for me, it was like, it may as well just been in the thesaurus next to odd, weird, strange.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's
It's
pretty
queer.
much what it
It's
is.
queer.
Right, exactly. But it had taken another connotation. And so through those years of like, yeah, whatever, and this fake.
It's a lot of years.
So if I ever did cry, it'd be like once a year, and it'd be like a Greek tragedy. Like, whoa.
So you're channeling your close deceased with your crystal.
So I'm in a play where I have to cry, and the director's like, "What's wrong with you? Why can't you do this?" And so then it's a last resort. So I'm like sneaking upstairs to the sanctuary of Unity, calling upon the spirits of people who've passed from AIDS, asking them to come help me, and then somehow this feeling comes into me, and I start crying, and it's like really big crying, and then I run backstage to where I go on, and
I'm ready.
and I go on and do my thing.
Wow.
And I get through this really difficult scene because it's a pathetic scene of me. It's my character. I've given up, and my lover comes home, and he's been fighting his own political battles with the AIDS front in the city of New York and blah, blah, blah. And then he sees me like on the floor, like my life, and he loses his temper, and he throws the milk carton down on the stage and splatters milk all over. And it's this really dramatic scene in the play, and it has to be done that way to make it work. And I have to be crying, pathetically crying to do it. And I couldn't cry. So I had to call upon the spirits of dead people to help me do that,
And it worked every time.
And it worked.
How many
times? We did 8 shows. And then after I get through that scene, my next scene is with his brother, and I'm talking to him about leaving my land to my partner. And then the scene after that is I'm in a hospital room, and the doctor is there, and the brother is there, and my lover is there, and we're getting married. And they now pronounce you, married. Mm-hmm. And then I die.
Wow.
And then we play Sometimes It Snows in April.
Oh my God. Really?
Yes. Then that song plays.
But you knew this record before that.
But I knew this record before that. And the guy who was the director of the play, he was my ex-boyfriend that I had broken up with like a year before that.
The one that told you to come audition?
Uh-huh.
Oh.
Yes. Right. And we had kind of a rough breakup. So
he still wanted you
But he wanted me to come do this. One of the reasons he wanted me to come do this is because I had been gay bashed in 1989. I had left the Club Cabaret, which was over at 51st and Main Street. It was a gay bar on Main Street.
Coming to Kansas City didn't mean you escaped.
No, it didn't. It didn't. I was working at Cafe Lulu, and after work you go out to a bar and have a few drinks, and it was 4th of July, and I lived about 4 blocks away. So I'm like, I'm gonna go home now, and I left, and there were 6 guys at a bus stop. And as I'm walking past this bus stop, one of them says, "You suck cock." And I just ignored it. And then from out of nowhere, this person came up behind me and slugged me right in the back of the head. And I went face forward into the sidewalk.
Oh.
And when I got up on my hands and knees, I was kicked by a boot in my head. And then I was like whipped back the other way. And I somehow got myself up off the ground and went across the street and went back to the bar. And I went in the front door, and no one was at the front of the bar, but there was a payphone there. So I called 911, and I'm in shock also. And the police department says, okay, we'll send a squad car, wait at the scene of the crime. So I hang up the phone and I walk back. And I stand right across the street from these 6 guys.
They're still there?
Who are still there. And they're like, what are you doing here? You fool. And I'm like, you had no right to do this to me. No. I'm in shock, you know. And they're like, and they literally said to me, can I cuss on the mic?
Of course.
They said, if you fucked women, this wouldn't happen to you.
Solid.
And then I passed out.
Did the ambulance come?
And a friend of mine that I worked with was leaving the bar going home, and they see me laying on the curb of the street. And they got me into their car and drove me to my apartment, and somehow got me into my apartment. And I remember coming to in my apartment, and this guy's going through the phone book, and I go, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm looking for a place to take you. You need to go to see a doctor. And I'm like, no, I don't. I'm fine. Just go home. Leave me. Go home. And I like begged him, and so he did. He finally left. And then I went to bed that night. And then the next morning, one of my best friends called me. She's like, what are you doing? And I go, I don't feel very good. She goes, what's the matter with you? And I go, I got beat up last night, and I think I'm really sick. I feel nauseous. And she's like, I'm coming right now to get you. And she came over and drove me to the hospital, and I went into one of those CAT scan things, and I had a crack in my skull, and where they hit me in the back. Yeah, I'm serious. And I was sort of out of commission for a couple of weeks. And then when I was able to go back to work, I had these huge bruises all over my face and my neck. And I'm waiting on tables, and people are like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, whatever. And
other people's parents doing a shitty job raising their kids. That's what happened.
It was crazy. And a friend of mine was like, I got a KC Star reporter involved, and he ended up writing a story about it.
It's all starting to feel very familiar.
I ended up on the front page of the Kansas City Star, Mark Manning, victim of gay bashing. And I kind of became a poster child for gay bashing at a time when that was sort of like the hot story of the year, when people were reporting about it. And so I ended up testifying at City Hall in Kansas City and in Independence, and then going out and speaking to other people about what happened to me. And it really changed my whole life.
For real?
It really did. I became an activist after that. I had not been really politically active in the gay community, really, and I became active. And I started participating and protesting and helping to change government. And we had a human rights ordinance that was on the books in City Hall that took 3 years to pass, and I was a part of that fight. And then
I've seen or read this somewhere.
Yeah, it's been out there. A friend of mine made a film called The Ordinance Project that kind of told that story, and I got to watch myself age like 30 years in one edit. Because all that footage, because all that's videotaped at City Hall, so they had all this footage that people had recorded on their VCRs and stuff to make this film.
Oh wow!
So you see me testifying at City Hall in 1991. That same year, and you see me talking about it like 25, 30 years later, you know, it's like, what happened to him? But yeah, it changed my life. Getting kicked in the head changed my whole, like I started doing theater in a whole different way. And
really?
We created this performance art group called Big Bang Buffet.
Okay.
We started doing performance art and protest. And really, I don't know if you've heard of late night theater, but that kind of came out of Big Bang Buffet. But it was just all these, at Cafe Lulu, Lee Jane Temple started this restaurant on 39th Street. And we decided to do this thing on Monday nights where we'd have poets or writers or whatever come and read part of a book that they're working on, or that was the whole idea in the beginning. And the performance artists kind of took over the show.
Nice.
We ended up doing like 150 weeks of this show.
Wow.
Even after the restaurant closed, we continued the show
in other spots,
in other places, and from that place, Big Bang Buffet came about.
Okay.
Because I realized I wasn't the only gay quirky person wanting to write about original stuff. There's a whole bunch of us, and we all banded together and created our own kind of loose company called Big Bang Buffet.
So the director of the thing at Unity Temple, who was your ex, wanted you to audition for this spot because of this thing that had happened to you.
Because of me being a gay bashing victim, he really felt like the audience would sympathize with me in this
was
role.
Was he right? Or
I don't know. It was his idea. It was his concept, and I don't know if that had anything to do with it. I do know that Larry Kramer wrote this play specifically to make the audience cry. I mean, it was very manipulative in that way. I mean, you have a wedding and then the person dies after I do. I mean, these are very a wedding and a funeral together. And what was hard was I'd already gone through my own catharsis of feelings. So by the time the play's over, I was light. Like I was almost like high from having released all this energy. And
Shannon, you're back to that, what was it, third floor?
No, it was, there were no drugs involved, but it was just going through this emotional roller coaster and then having completed it. And so I was high, so I would just go out and console people, like, because people are crying. You know, this play is like.
You must have been doing a good job acting.
It was a tragedy.
You said you weren't.
The play was written that way. I mean, he wanted people to wake up and do something about the AIDS crisis. You know, because we had Ronald Reagan, who didn't even say the word AIDS until like 6 years into his presidency.
Is that true?
Yeah, and meanwhile, people are just dying all over the place. You know, and it really wasn't until Rock Hudson died that people started really paying attention to it. But up until that point,
Rock Hudson, same like he was a real handsome ladies man kind of. But he was gay but people didn't.
He was always
say
gay,
it, right?
Right.
I mean,
everyone in Hollywood knew he was gay, but the rest of the world didn't. It was kept a secret.
Yeah,
you know,
just like the others,
just like all the others. Yeah. It was the closet. That's what's so bad about the closet is it's not a healthy place to be. Being closeted is not going to be good. And if you have to be a secret about it, like there were so many people that lived in small towns that would only be able to express themselves as a gay person once a month when they got out of town and went to a bigger city and had anonymous sex with somebody and then came back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's not healthy. And at least not when there's a epidemic, you know, being passed around, and it's being passed around sexually. You know, from a contact with blood and semen, and there were so many misconceptions about AIDS. And being in the theater, it was kind of like being on the forefront of it, because the first people to ever talk about it were the theater people. The first art being created about AIDS was through theater.
Yeah.
And so working at the Unicorn at that time, we were doing all kinds of AIDS stuff, and The Normal Heart was this play that was one of those plays that was trying to wake up people. And after that play, I cry like every day now.
I meant to say, has it returned as a normal?
No, it brought it like restarted my senses, and I was able to like also get rid of that old part of me that had shame and guilt attached with being gay. Because a lot of gay people and a lot of victims of bashing blame themselves. Like if I wouldn't have, like I was being stupid, I shouldn't have been walking on that street, or I should have been doing this.
Waited for my friends to leave.
Yeah, all this woulda, shoulda, coulda, which is a pointless thing to do. But yeah, a lot of gay victims wouldn't even go report it to the police. And before that period, a lot of times the police were like, "Too bad for you. That's what happens when you're gay," Yeah. And
same thing. The perpetrator.
Right. Exactly. We've come a long way.
Have you seen Fight Club?
Yes.
You said that you would say that, sir. You also said you would say that. So you're just kind of like, there's zero ways out of this,
right? In
this current moment,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Terrifying.
No,
I would imagine
it's one of those things that you don't expect to happen in your life, and then it does, and then you're like, why did it happen? And we're always trying to find out why. And I always think that, like, I'm not one of those people that believe that everything happens for a reason. I don't like that.
It's a nice thing to say in certain situations.
Yeah, I would rather apply the scientific approach of life is chaotic. People are being born and dying all the time randomly, and you didn't get chosen to. It was just a random thing that happened, and that gives me more faith. That belief system.
dudes?
6 dudes, but really only like one of them that did.
Were any of them ever identified?
No.
Nothing?
No. And it was shadowy, and it's like...
Are you okay with that? Or
is
there a part of you that wishes that it would have gone
No, it became really confusing for me because when I went to report it to the police, the only thing the police really did was say, are they black or white? And that brought this whole other question into my mind about what does race have to do with it? You know, what is the... And then I started thinking about all of that, and that just opened up this whole other thought process for me about how there's like a totem pole of people who are put down by society, and like gay men are here.
Who knew a Prince record was going to take us down this sad?
I'm sorry. Sometimes it says in April is the thing. Yeah, it's like black men have been... Our society has been trying to emasculate black men for 400 years, you know?
Well, and then I think that's straight black men.
That's straight black men.
Gay black men are even a chip.
Gay black men are like a double... They got several things against them, you know, because within the black community, it's hard to be openly gay too. And like when I worked at Kinko's 39th and Rainbow for a while, and I would make color copies for people. And this elderly black woman came in and she goes, I want a color copy of this. And it was a picture of her husband. And she goes, but I want you to take the color out of it. And I'm like, what? This is crazy, you know? And anyway, he was in the war, in the service. And remember when they did black and white photos, but they would like touch them up with a little bit of color? Mm-hmm. Well, for black soldiers, they would give them lipstick and rouge. They would feminize, like some racist bastard in a photo lab somewhere. I'm not kidding you.
Intentionally?
Not intentionally.
Maliciously?
And it happened, it wasn't across the board, but there were certain places where it happened, and it happened to her.
And she has the only copy of that photo.
That's her, like there aren't a lot of, and she's got this picture of her husband, and she's asking me to take the color out of it because they put red lips on him and rouge on his face. And I'm like, I like take her order back to the copy machine, and I'm like I wanted to start crying.
Yeah,
it's so...
Also, is there a button for that? I mean...
There is.
Okay. Jesus.
And that brings up a whole other thing about Canon color copiers are programmed to copy white people. So when black people come in with photographs to have copied, you have to reprogram the machine.
Nuh-uh.
Yes.
What?
Because it's set up a certain way, and like it has magenta and cyan and yellow and black, and it mixes those powders to get all the colors. And so it has a formula, and they computerize it to make it work for... It's like flesh-colored Band-Aids. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've seen a flesh-colored Band-Aid? Yeah. What color is it? Okay.
Not black.
So it's like that kind of a thing. And I was like, oh my God, there's so much. Just living in Kansas City has taught me so much about how we have to know our history and know what's gone on before to understand why we live the way we do, and why, because even today we have people running for president who are trying to divide and conquer and make people have fear of the other. And a lot of times that's a racial thing too, like God forbid Barack Obama be reelected, or, you know what I mean? I'm from a place where people believe that way. People think that way in some small towns in Nebraska. And I have people in my family who are racist and literally think that way. And they don't even know anybody who's diverse. It's just this fear of it that is like, I don't know. We got way off track.
Yeah.
Sorry, Prince.
No, yes.
That's what Prince, and Prince, like Little Richard, the way that they chose to present themselves in this whole world, in this whole scheme of all of this, they chose to play with feminine and masculine. And he has lyrics of, controversy. If you listen to the song Controversy, am I black or white? Am I straight or gay? controversy, and he's like playing with this idea.
Yeah.
He's just messing with us. But for like me in this small town in Nebraska, hearing this record, I'm like, he's blowing the door open. Prince is like revolutionary in what he's doing with music.
Band name.
Dirty Mind, Controversy, all those songs. And then this record is like a work of art. It's really beautiful. His whole catalog, there's so much good stuff. But this album, it was hard for me to pick up my favorite. It was really hard, but this, well, we just told a whole hour of stories.
And speaking of, no, you're good. It's absolutely good. I'm one time when we crested the 4-hour mark, this camera fritzed out. So I want to wrap and get you out of here, right?
I can't believe you're telling me this. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I do.
When you said it, I think it'd be more like 2 hours. I'm like, oh my God, this could be long.
I know. It goes fast.
I'm sorry.
It's great. I want to hopefully have all the. So I wrap with a series of goofy questions, and then we'll get you out of here.
Okay.
Do you have some version of a personal and a professional bucket list? And if so, what's at the top of each?
I've given up on a lot of it.
Okay.
Because I had an idea originally in my life that I wanted to move to Kansas City, and after 3 years, move to Chicago, and after 3 years, move to New York, and then be on Saturday Night Live. I wanted to do that. I wanted to be on that show more than anything in the world and do weird comedy bits and stuff like that. And it didn't work out like that for me in my life. And after living in Kansas City for 3 years, that happened. The gay bashing happened. I also met my partner, Caleb, and we've been together for about 31 years. Oh, wow. And I created a family with him in our own way. And then the garden project, and like you're talking about your dogs, I rescued dogs from KCK, and I had 2 dogs that I found in gardens and a cat, and I found other animals that I found homes for them too, but I had 2 dogs that both lived to be about 17. Wow. That were like rescues from the garden who like changed my life in a lot of ways. And so I just kind of accepted my path. It's sort of like I've never really applied for a job or like looked at the one ad. I've always had a job lead to another. I don't have a job right now. I need a job. Hey, I'm kind of in between jobs. Sure. If you have an idea, let me know. But right now I need to get a job. That's a
bucket list.
Is that a bucket list?
Yeah.
I need to get a job.
I need to get one, and then now a new thing.
I need to like pay off some bills and kind of get myself a little bit more financially secure, because I kind of have been living in the moment, and I also have been giving a lot of myself to the radio station, and I was volunteering for a position that is almost like a full-time job, and it's like they don't have enough money to hire a program director, so it's like the chairman of the programming committee. But I'd like to like get off of that committee and
take a little slice
of life. Yeah. I'm going to be working on a show for the Fringe Festival with a friend of mine, and I don't really know. I don't really have a bucket list.
That's cool. That's
crazy?
A perfect answer. No, it's great.
Yeah.
Lunch with anyone, dead or alive. You're choosing who and why.
Oh my God, these are hard questions. Jesus God. Dang. Oh my God. I would. Do you know who Angela Davis is?
Yeah,
she's like a black activist and teacher and writer, and she ran for president like a long time ago in the Communist Party, and she was in prison for a while for a charge that was all trumped up. But I would love to like have lunch with her. She's a writer and an activist and has so many good things to say. She's a real advocate for the prison reform.
Okay,
and how our prison system is all screwed up and messed up, and she has a voice that when she speaks I feel like I've taken a calming medicine. She has this really incredible beautiful voice. I would like to have lunch with her.
Cool.
Angela Davis.
I love it.
Angela,
hit your boy up, Angela.
Yeah, really. She doesn't know me.
You're given the ability to visit your past self at any age. What age are you choosing and what are you saying?
I think I would go back to 19, that crazy year that I came out. There's so many crazy stuff going on, and I think I would say slow down and don't overdo it. Like, take your time, because I was reacting emotionally as you do at 19, and when you're 19, it's just so how life works. We get wisdom later in life. But we have all the courage earlier in life.
Yeah,
you know what I
exactly.
mean? So when you're 19, you're like, I don't care. I can live through anything. Exactly. You know what I mean? And yet you know crap. You know, you're like, you have so much to learn. So I would like to say, hey, wait a second. You need to slow down a bit. Okay. You got a lot to learn.
Complete this for me, please. The world would immediately become a better place in which to live if only
Donald Trump would die.
Oh, okay. All right. I mean,
how else are we going to get out of this mess? I don't know how else. I'm really worried about the next election and this whole
as you should be
political season. It's like, who do we have? It's not a good choice, is it?
I don't think so. I mean,
I don't know.
True or false? It is okay and acceptable to wear the T-shirt of the band whose show you're going to.
True. Yes.
Okay. I like.
Oh, definitely. Oh, please do.
Good stuff.
You can tell a lot about concert shirts.
Absolutely. Mark Manning, thank you so very much. Wednesday Midday Medley airs at 10 a.m. Central on KKFI 90.1, kkfi.org/listen/ Any other plugs?
If you want to come on the radio, just let me know. I interview about 150 people a year on the show.
Impressive.
And we try to play as many local releases as possible, and the radio station belongs to the people. So I'm always telling everybody, if you want to come on, I literally...
We kind of think of this as our show.
Exactly. Thank you. You need to come in and have me tape you saying that. In fact, you should come on the show too. Okay.
Right.
If you have time anytime, I have openings starting in like March 20th and beyond.
Sure.
So
I'm happy to talk about it for sure.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time, and this has been wonderful. Hope to talk to you soon.
Sure thing.
Thanks.
Blair.
Bye.